Chapter 375. Although Aurelia was happy to see her king finally become determined, she had to remind the Sun King, the trolls are not everything. The threat of the horde is the most important. Fortunately, I brought powerful reinforcements. Duke Marcus of Stormwind City and his 30,000 private soldiers. Unexpectedly, the Sun King refused. No, I don't need human help. The High Elves can deal with the invaders themselves. Summon my son. Aurelia instinctively felt that something was wrong. The elves were too arrogant and isolated. They thought that they were the source of the world's civilization. They thought that humans were just picking up the magic left behind by the elves. They thought that the mechanical creations of the dwarves and gnomes were evil. Thousands of years of isolation had not brought the elves anything other than the arrogance of the High Elves. No, perhaps there was. It was depravity. Thinking back to 3,000 years ago, a Nastrian had almost been forced to abdicate by the Silver Moon Council. The reason was that a Nastrian had taught the humans too much magic. Aurelia shouted for her king to pay attention to the orcs. Unfortunately, her opinion was once again ignored. Her clear voice was drowned out by the noisy argument between the Lord and the mage counselors. In the end, the Sun King dismissed Aurelia with a few words. "Thank you for informing me again, my Ranger General. Now is the time for you to fulfill your duty. Bring your Ranger troops and stop all the trolls. Before our army arrives, I do not wish to hear more news of the fall of the trolls." Wait, where are the reinforcements? Our losses are already very severe. More than half of the troops have been crippled, and we have less than half of our full strength. Aurelia tried to argue. There are no reinforcements. Even if you can't do it, you must do it. The country let you lead the Ranger troops to pacify the border. Yes, evacuating the people is also your duty. If you can't stop them, then bury yourself there too. What a joke. The Ranger troops that were left with less than 3,000 people to fight against the allied army of 100,000 orcs and trolls? One had to know that the Elven Rangers had no advantage against the trolls. The current situation was that they couldn't even stop the trolls, and they still had to evacuate the civilians. Aurelia was furious. Of course, at this time, Aurelia naturally thought of Duque. Unexpectedly, the Sun King added, "I don't care if your boyfriend is nearby. You are now the general of Cuel Salis. Do your duty, or I will prosecute you for treason. Also, if humans enter our borders without our permission, then we'll deal with them the same way we dealt with the trolls." The Sun King's words made Aurelia's heart sink into an icy hell. What time was it? Did they really think that they could rely on the elves to win this interracial war? It was obvious that they couldn't win if they didn't work together. "Your Majesty!" Aurelia raised her voice. "Guards, take her away. Let the council send an army supervisor to ensure that the two generals of the Windrunner family fulfill their duties." The Sun King waved his hand, and nearly 10 kite shields of the Imperial Guards quickly blocked the line of sight between her and the Sun King. "Sorry, it's my duty. Please." The guard captain didn't look good either. Everyone's eyes were bright. Aurelia, the hero of the Trolls' War, had been stationed at the border for more than 3,000 years for the safety of Cuel Salis. This time, she had informed them of the large-scale invasion of the trolls in advance. The first time, she was completely humiliated by the counselors with words. The second time, even though she had the great merit of alerting the higher-ups, she was given the cold shoulder again because of her background. In the end, it was because all the higher-ups of the elves were mages, and they had a fanatical admiration for spellcasters. All beings other than the spellcasters were regarded as cannon fodder. If the Windrunner family was a mage family, she would have become the hero of Cuel Salis again by now. Aurelia was taken away. When a substitute counselor appeared among the heavily damaged rangers as an army supervisor, everyone's lungs were about to explode. "Bastard! The Silver Moon Council is like Chocobo H*T. Sister. Since we agreed to become Duque's vassals, we might as well let Duque's troops come in early, and we'll just pretend we didn't see it." Servanas, the most rebellious of the Windrunner sisters, cursed angrily. But all she got was a slap in the face. Servanas was stunned by the slap. Aurelia's sharp voice said, You and I are now Qul Salas's ranger generals. Right now, our hometown is under attack. How can you face the country and the people by saying this? As long as we still carry the epaulets of Qul Salas, His Majesty's orders are absolute. Not to mention Servanas, even Aurelia felt an unsuppressible sense of grievance. Servanas argued unwillingly, there are clearly better ways to solve this crisis and avert a possible disaster, but you gave up everything because of your arrogance. This kind of method will kill countless people. Do you really want to suppress your unhappiness and force yourself to accept it? What else can I do? This is a time of war. If after the war, everyone is safe, of course I can peacefully serve Duque. But right now, our hometown is burning. If I do anything special, it will be treason. Aurelia couldn't help but shout. Sasha and Lilith watched the two sisters argue and couldn't get a word in. Both sides felt that they were right, but they couldn't come up with any better ideas. Sasha could only look like she was about to cry and persuade the two sisters to stop arguing. Servanas stubbornly said, "Idiot, don't you rely on Duque a lot? Then go find him. That guy has a lot of ideas. I'm sure he will think of something better than you. Yes, why don't you go find Duque?" With her sister's cover, Aurelia found the human mage that Duque had placed in the ranger army, Darnielle, and asked him to send a message to Duque using magic. Very soon, Aurelia contacted Duque. After she told him about her difficulties, Duque laughed. "Idiot, you should have come to me earlier. I was thinking if you were captured by the Sun King, should I declare war on Qul Salas? Or should I use political means to bail you out? Please, I'm asking for your help. Duque, don't make trouble." Aurelia sounded like she was about to cry. "You must be joking. This joke isn't funny at all. All right, leave the task of delaying the orcs to me. You focus on organizing the evacuation of the people? What do you plan to do? Your soldiers can't cross the border. I promise that not a single soldier from the Alliance or Stormwind will cross the border." Chapter 376. Once again, it was proven that Aurelia had once again underestimated Duque's intelligence. Or rather, she had underestimated Duque's ability to play with words. On this day, more than 5,000 goblin spirit robots strode across the Qul Salas border, which was no longer under the control of the elves. The Windrunner sisters were dumbfounded. They were completely dumbfounded. This is possible? Aurelia looked at Duque on the other side of the border. Why not? Duque put his hands on his hips. Is it wrong for a toy to accidentally cross the border? Furthermore, which eye of yours saw that these are mine? These are clearly elven products. Aurelia rolled her eyes at Duque flirtatiously. Her expression was truly complicated. She was gratified, but also did not know whether to laugh or cry. Right? In theory, these goblins belonged to the elves. But did he not see the words Qul Salas 10,086 Border Guard written in the human language on the outer shell of the goblin's armor? Of course, the elves would not have such a terrible designation, nor would they use a language other than the High Elves' language. They would also not have these gnome-style robots that would affect the appearance of the elves. Silvermoon City also had battle puppets, but those magic puppets were all round and curvaceous. They were obviously arcane style. In any case, not a single human soldier had crossed the border. In order to avoid suspicion, Duque had even transferred Darnielle back. A perfect game of words. Duque naturally would not do such a thing for the Bulsh *T Sun King. He only did it for the Windrunner sisters. More accurately, it was for Aurelia. Aurelia was very clear what Duque had paid for this. Duque had set up a fully automated robot production line in Karazhan. Naturally, Khadgar would help Duque with the work. To transport so many goods over, Duque had to do it himself. Duque was still not strong enough. He could only transport no more than 1 ton of people or goods at a time. Even so, Duque was exhausted. He was like a dead dog for the whole day. However, it was enough to receive a grateful look from Aurelia. He had to fight in the horde, and he had to pick up girls along the way. Nothing could be more perfect than that. On this day, the giant demon army, which had originally had an overwhelming advantage, ran into a huge problem. Because of Yao Yao Ling, most of the giant demons that had been tricked by Yao Yao had died. The tribe was indeed annoyed by the warning function of the demon spirits. No one had expected that the combined power of the Yao Yao spirit and the Elven Ranger would be so amazing. Those seemingly silly mechanical creations wandered aimlessly in the Long Song forest. However, a high-speed paint arrow would suddenly shoot out from the Yao Yao spirit and hit a giant demon that was hiding on the tree. In a jungle battle, under the premise that both sides wanted to kill the other, the most important thing was to discover the other side first. In previous battles, concealment and enemy detection techniques were the most important. Observation, judgment, and experience were all indispensable. Any miscalculation would result in death. The appearance of the Yao Yao spirit completely broke this balance. First of all, the Yao Yao spirit was not afraid of death. It was a mechanical creation, and if it was destroyed, it could be dragged away. It was impossible to repair it on the spot. Duque ran back to Karazhan overnight to practice engineering, and all he could do was fiddle with a mobile version of the waste recycling robot 74A. This thing would automatically find the dead Yao Yao spirit robots in the forest, recycle their wreckage, and decompose them into the necessary engineering parts. Without any worries, the Yao Yao spirit naturally went to seek death. The Elven Ranger squad followed far behind, and the Yao Yao spirit boldly opened the way. For example, this time, the Yao Yao spirit suddenly shouted, "Help! There's a pervert!" After splashing paint on a certain troll on the tree, the troll himself was hit by a flying axe and died immediately. Its sacrifice was worth it. In the next second, the giant demon was shot in the head by the Elven Ranger who followed. The Rangers were embarrassed, but it was undeniable that the Yao Yao spirit's reconnaissance was very good. They concluded a pattern that they didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There's a pervert. There was a giant demon. There are a few perverts. There were no more than 5 giant demons. So many perverts. That was about 10. No, there are too many perverts. I have to give up on healing. This meant that there were more than 50 giant demons, and the Rangers had to retreat immediately. It had to be said that with the help of the Yao Yao spirit, Aurelia only relied on less than 3,000 Rangers to hold off 50,000 giant demons. She also freed up more than 300 Rangers with minor injuries to organize the evacuation in the rear. Everyone, don't panic. Hold on, Silver Moon's reinforcements will arrive soon. In order to calm the people, Aurelia had to say some nonsense that she didn't even believe herself. How could Silver Moon's reinforcements arrive so quickly? Unless a Nastrian was willing to send out Silver Moon's regular army, it would take at least 3 days to gather the troops. But would the Horde give her 3 days? It was also that night that the Horde's main force arrived. Unlike the giant demons who charged straight into Long Song Forest, the orcs also sent out a detachment to attack the Windrunner's hometown, Windwalk Village, and the Windrunner Tower at the southwestern edge of Long Song Forest. Thanks to Aurelia's advance notice, even though the officials sent by Silver Moon forbade the Windrunner family from evacuating to Silver Moon in advance, every family had already made preparations to retreat. Packing things in advance was not against the law, was it? Almost as soon as Silver Moon's permission to retreat was given, all the elves in the village threw their belongings into the elven transport ships that had been prepared beforehand in an orderly manner. In just 2 hours they had all evacuated. The detachment of the orcs could only run back and follow behind the main force to guard against Duque's possible attack. However, the efforts of the Rangers only managed to slow down the Horde. The Horde's green tide drowned out all resistance. In just 3 days, the Horde had killed their way to the Eastern Temple, which was only 100 kilometers south of Silver Moon City. The elves relied solely on the temple's powerful magical defense system to resist the Horde's attack. As the Horde invested a large number of 2-headed ogre mages, the situation began to worsen. At this moment, Prince Kale, who had rushed back, saw the army of 25,000 people that had been hastily assembled. Looking at the troops that his father and the Silver Moon Council had gathered for him, Kale's face was ashen. What kind of joke is this? This is the army that you want me to fight against a 100,000 Horde army? Most of the 25,000 people were local garrison troops that had withdrawn from the front lines. Unlike the Rangers who had always been fighting at the front lines, the training of these garrison troops was terrible, and most of them had been killed by the orcs. Most importantly, Kale, that's realized that there was a serious lack of warriors in this army. Warriors who could hold the front and suppress the enemy's formation. Chapter 377. I'm sorry, my child. This is the strongest army I can gather for you. Kale, that's looked excited. For the sake of the well of the sun. Didn't I keep sending letters to my father a year ago to tell him about the threat of the tribe? All the motions to prepare for war were rejected by the council. The reason was that Kuel Salus was not at risk of being affected by the flames of war, so there was no reason to increase the defense budget. In fact, until 3 days ago, the councillors still believed that the runestone array was invincible. Now, the entire Kuel Salus is in chaos, and the country seriously lacks pre-war mobilization. We are very passive. The Sun King sighed deeply, his face filled with worry and resentment. Council, Silvermoon Council again. The cancer that imprisoned the entire High Elves and rejected all progress and change. The resentment in his heart almost caused Kale, that's chest to explode. No matter how well-educated he was, he had the urge to scream and vent his anger. Why did a prince like him have to study in the Dalagen for a long time? To put it nicely, it was to let the prince go out to absorb new knowledge. To put it bluntly, the Silvermoon Council, whose power was above the royal power, exiled him in order to limit the royal power. Who could understand the frustration of not being able to return to his home? His excellent self-restraint allowed Kale, that's to suppress the anger in his heart. Of course, over the years in the Dalagen, Kale, that's had also gained a lot of knowledge. Perhaps the High Elves had unparalleled talent in using magic, but the development of magic was no longer the same magic world in the minds of the elves that had not changed for thousands of years. It was bad enough that the high-level elves refused to accept new things, but they were so arrogant and stupid that they did not even care about the enemy in front of them. They only cried out when the enemy put a knife to their neck. So there really is an enemy? Although he was angry, Kale, that was still very clear-headed. Having deeply experienced the ferocity of the tribe, he knew very well that it was impossible for this rotten army to defeat the tribe. But for the sake of his people, Kale, that's resolutely accepted this appointment. There was no other reason, just because his surname was Sunstrider. He was the only heir of the Kuel Salus royal family. Since birth, he had been trained as a perfectionist, and glory and responsibility had long been branded in the deepest part of his noble soul. He was duty-bound to save his hometown. That's lowered his head and said, "Father, for the sake of the Well of the Sun and the continuation of the High Elves, I'm willing to sacrifice my life for Kuel Salus." Sacrifice his life? These words were very serious, so serious that even the Sun King was shocked. He immediately felt that something was wrong. He knew very well that his son wouldn't say such harsh words without any special reason. The Sun King wanted his only successor to die on the battlefield? Stop joking. It wasn't easy to find an opportunity to make things difficult for the council. A Nastrian summoned Kale, that's back so that Kale, that's could have a glorious return like a king. So that Kale that's could better inherit his throne in the future and one day limit the excessive power of the Silvermoon Council. Child, is this tribe really that powerful? Anastrian's energy was no longer what it used to be. Too much of it had been consumed by internal strife, turning the Sun King who ended the war against the trolls into a fatuous ruler, who was an expert in internal strife and a layman in external warfare. The upper echelons of Kuel Salus wouldn't take ordinary warriors seriously. No matter how many orc warriors there were, they would only treat them as ants. After deliberating in his heart for a while, Kale, that said, "Let's not talk about anything else. There's a warlock named Ghoul, Dan among the orcs in the tribe. He fought to a draw with the Dalagen Antonidas in a head-on battle." The Sun King was finally moved. Whether it was him or the Silvermoon Council, most of them looked down on human mages. But there was an exception, Antonidas, the strongest supergenius mage in the Dalajan in the past 100 years. In a semi-public competition 30 years ago, Anastrian and Antonidas had fought to a draw. This battle had also established Antonidas' transcendental status in the Dalajan. The Sun King could look down on any spellcaster, but he couldn't look down on Antonidas. Powerhouses didn't discriminate between races or countries. An orc powerhouse who was as famous as Antonidas couldn't be overestimated. The Sun King rubbed his chin. "Child, how about this? I'll give you a team of arcane puppets from the garrison of Silvermoon City, along with 10 mountain giants and 2 spellbreakers. Go fight a beautiful victory and come back." Kale's face finally lit up. At that moment, the father and son didn't realize that they'd been tricked. First, it was Gul'dan. In the entire alliance and even the world of Azeroth, no one except Duque knew where Gul'dan's true strength was. In terms of high-end combat power, the elves had made the first mistake. Second, it was their understanding of the orc warrior's strength. Other than the Windrunner sisters, none of the high-ranking elves had personally been to the battlefield. Their understanding of the orcs was also only on paper. They only saw the exchange ratio after the battle between the humans and the orcs. They felt that the humans and orcs suffered similar losses, so they equated the combat power of the orc warriors with the human warriors. No one cared. This was the exchange ratio that Duque had used to its limit. Finally, it was the change brought about by the runestones. In the elves' impression, the runestone's defensive circle was broken, so be it. No one could understand how much the storm altar, which was made of rune stones, could improve the tribe. Now that all the ogres in the tribe had become two-headed, the physical qualities of the ogres were considered high on this planet. After the biggest problem of mental retardation had been eliminated, their combat power had more than doubled. Moreover, there were a large number of ogre mages among the thousands of ogres. How could a single-core CPU compare to a dual-core one? Just like that, the great Prince Kale, that's valiantly led the army against the invaders on his first journey in life. The army of 27,000 people stretched from the capital of Silvermoon City all the way to the city gate. In the majestic army, every soldier's armor was adorned with exquisite carvings and patterns. A bright red background, beautiful golden edges, and a winged headband that only had weak defensive capabilities apart from decoration. Since they were fighting at home, the chocobos that pulled the carriages did not bring too much baggage. Instead, they brought a large number of magic stones and various musical instruments to boost morale. A mage close to the Windrunner family sent a magic mirror. When Duque and the others saw this scene, they were completely dumbfounded. Even a righteous young man like Reginald Windsor could not help but complain, "What the hell, are they going to war or an armed patrol?" Chapter 378. In every war, there would be all sorts of strange things, be it inventions, tactics, or something else. A country with enough strategic depth could rely on its vast territory to fight and retreat, giving the rear enough time to react and grow, accumulating strength for a future counterattack. Small countries. Once their capital was used up, it would be easy for the country to be destroyed in a few days. Cuel Salis was neither big nor small. In terms of land area, its actual territory was about Eversong Forest and half of the Land of the Ghost in the future. At most, it was a third of the size of Lordaeron. In the Land of the Ghost, the other half was the Trolls' territory, which was controlled by Zwaman's Amani troll clan. Their territory clearly did not have any strategic depth, but they still rejected the humans' help and played the tactic of adding fuel to the fire. Duque did not know what to say about this. Rubbing his brow, Duque whispered, "It's good to let Aurelia give up." With that, Duque conveyed his analysis to Aurelia. Aurelia immediately rushed to Kale, that sighed as if her butt was on fire. "Your Highness, are you planning to let the army fight the horde on the plains?" Aurelia was someone who knew how to use troops. With so many burly arcane constructs and the even larger mountain giants, it was impossible for them to fight in the forest. "What's the problem, General Windrunner?" "General Windwalker." Kale, that's revealed a gentle and refined smile. "Your Highness, we can't fight the horde head-on. The High Elves lack enough vanguards. The arcane constructs are not bad, and the mountain giants are also very powerful. But they are too few in number. Once the vanguard is defeated, all the mages and rangers in the rear will be hunted down by the horde like ducks. Aurelia argued. After hanging out with Duque for so long, she had heard about the tragic battles in the Elven Forest during the Stormwind last year. Aurelia knew very well how terrifying an orc army could be on flat ground when they went all out. In fact, in places like South Shore and the South Flow Coast, the humans had also used high-intensity fortifications to weaken the beastmen's mobility and sharpness to the extreme. That was how they managed to achieve such a magnificent exchange rate. Now, Kale, that's actually wanted to fight the horde on the plains? Aurelia felt that not only Kale, but the entire upper echelon of the High Elves had gone crazy. Please watch your tone, Sir Ranger General. In the face of a great battle, your pessimism is the worst. Following the direction of the voice, Aurelia noticed an unusually burly warrior beside the prince. Most of the elves were slender and weak in terms of strength and physique. There were always exceptions to everything. For example, this person in front of him. Just by looking at his figure in the middle of the night, he looked no different from a troll. Tall, strong, bulging muscles filled with surging power and beauty. You are. He couldn't see any military epaulets, but he could tell from the mark on his breastplate that he was a baron. Baron Saguna, a follower of His Highness. Oh, he was a hardcore fan of Kale, Despite staying in the Dalagen for many years, Kale, had still won over a group of die-hard followers who weren't of high status. Aurelia was annoyed with him. I'm not being pessimistic. I'm just objectively speaking as an elf who has really fought against the horde. I'm telling His Highness the difference in strength between us and the enemy. Understand? May I ask how many beastmen you've killed? Saguna raised his nose slightly, his eyes full of disdain. Aurelia narrowed her eyes. The number of kills verified by the Lordaeron Alliance is 1,388 orc warriors. There were already so many verified ones. Those that weren't, this was an era where heroes were worshipped. Killing one person was considered a murderer. Killing 10 people was considered a butcher. But killing 100 people was considered a hero. Not to mention killing the evil beastmen and trolls who had invaded their homeland. Saguna was finally moved. Only now did he remember that this noble and wild female ranger standing in front of him was a very famous hero since the Troll War. At this moment, Kale, helped his people out. He pondered for a moment. I understand your concerns, General. Let's do it this way. The plan for the decisive battle remains the same, but the location of the decisive battle will be the plains south of the Eastern Temple. I'll have to trouble the Windrunner's ranger to cover it. Kale, pointed to the Windrunner's defensive area, which happened to be the Eastern Temple. It had to be said that after being suppressed by the Council for so many years, the most important skill Kale had learned was compromise. Perhaps this would put him further and further away from the realm of heroes, but it was undoubtedly in line with the national conditions of the upper echelons of Kuel Salis. A qualified and mellow politician would undoubtedly be better off than an upright and outspoken hero. The location of the decisive battle was under the cover of their own defensive line. Even if there was a so-called in case, the army could retreat under the cover of the relatively complete magic defense system of the Holy Temple. Aurelia trembled all over, but in the end, she didn't argue any further. Kale, had already given in, at least avoiding the worst outcome. No one could find fault with the decision to withdraw the ranger team, which had suffered the most losses since the start of the war, to the second line. Listening to the surrounding lackeys of the prince flatter her with, His Highness is wise, Aurelia felt as disgusted as if she had swallowed a fly. She saluted and left. The next day, standing on a high hill and watching the forest and elven villages that were being set ablaze, Orgrim felt a rare sense of elation that he had not felt since the start of the battle. The scouts have reported that the Long-Ears are foolish enough to fight us on the plains? He asked his aide. Is that true? Zulud, the chief of the Dragonroar tribe, nodded. That's right. They probably believe that before we defeat their vanguard, they can use their damned magic to destroy us. Orgrim sneered. All right, the great orc warriors shouldn't waste their energy on the enemy's magic. Especially when there's a choice, let Gul'dan's new toy go first. The second battle of the Dark Portal, a completely different battle of Kuel Salis, officially began on the 2nd of June. Hoot 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 hoot. The distinctive horn of the High Elves sounded. The horns of the Horde were usually rough and bold, while the horns of the Alliance were majestic and heroic, while the horns of the Elven Alliance were king, the horns of the Elven Alliance were completely used as trumpets. There were even buttons on the trumpets that could be played with cadence. The Elven army, which the royal Sunstrider family had high hopes for, walked out of a lush green forest. The entire enemy's formation was presented in front of these elves who hadn't fought for nearly 3,000 years. The elves sneered. The Horde's formation was too scattered, like a group of beggars gathered together. Chapter 379. There were all kinds of equipment on the tribe's side. Warhammers made of stone, spears made of sharpened tree branches, armor made of animal hides that were pieced together from tree branches, and fresh catapults. At first glance, one would think that their opponent was an uncivilized savage tribe. The trolls on the flanks of the orcs were still the same as they were thousands of years ago. The spears were all made out of sharp stones. While they were quite dangerous to the almost unarmored rangers, they were completely useless against the heavily armored elven infantry and arcane constructs. The elven soldiers' initial nervousness disappeared when they saw the scene in front of them, followed by soft laughter. I thought it was some amazing intelligent race that could break through our defense with runes. The rangers at the border are also useless. They actually lost all their dignity to these fellows, sending out dozens of letters for help in a day. The soldiers' laughter drifted into the ears of the rangers stationed at the eastern defense line of the temple. Every elf ranger was furious. The 4 Windrunner sisters stood in different postures. Aurelia stood proudly against the wind like a pine tree. She was expressionless, but anyone could see the pain in her eyes. Servanas crossed his arms and leaned against the shadow of a pillar in the temple. He had his back to the battlefield, and a bone-chilling smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Sasha, who was supposed to be the most lively, hugged her knees and sat on the stairs of the temple, not saying a word. Lilith, on the other hand, covered her forehead with her right palm and looked into the distance. Big sister, it's the trash in front, and the elites of the Blackrock tribe at the back. There seems to be a special fog spell at the back. Duque was right again. Aurelia, the great hero of the Troll War, mumbled to herself in a daze. Soon, her green eyes regained their vigor. As long as Duque is here, the High Elves will not perish. Then she raised her voice and shouted, Hadgeron! 2 elven rangers immediately walked behind Aurelia. Hadgeron Bright Wing reporting. Lorthma Theron reporting. Aurelia turned around. Is everything ready? The 2 ranger captains were a little hesitant. After a short moment of shock, they replied in unison, We're ready. That's good. Aurelia nodded. She didn't realize that she had just given orders to 2 of the 3 most powerful men in Silvermoon City. On the other side, both sides sounded the horns of marching at almost the same time. All the elven warriors did the same action and put on their helmets. The elven helmets were very different from the Arathur standard helmets commonly used by the Alliance. Its decorative significance was far greater than its actual combat significance. Compared to the half-mask style of the Alliance's helmet, the elven helmet was more like a beautifully carved visor. There were complex patterns and extremely fine dyeing on it. From afar, it seemed as if the entire mountain and plains were reflecting gold and red light. Because of the widespread use of the kite shield, the soldiers' movements were also quite agile. However, when Orgrim saw this relatively narrow shield on the podium, the great chief let out a cold laugh. On the other side, on a huge podium held up by 4 5-meter-tall, huge arcane constructs, the great legitimate heir of the Sunstrider royal family, Kale, showed off his dazzling appearance in front of the army. Every wave of his hand and every movement had an unimaginable charm. Pointing lightly into the distance, Kale, shouted, Cover fire! As the messenger's voice spread through the unimaginably mature magic communication system to the mages at the rear. On the hillside near the eastern temple, a continuous line of fire lit up the entire horizon, emitting a dazzling light. This was the fireball spell cast by more than 1,000 earth mages at the same time. It was already equivalent to the total number of mages in several human kingdoms, but for the high elves, this was just the standard. In fact, mages made up more than 1/10 of the elven army. The momentum created by so many mages was incomparably terrifying. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. With continuous whistling sounds, countless fireballs passed over the heads of the elven infantrymen and reached the orc stragglers who were beginning to charge on the other side of the battlefield. It was an instinctive premonition of impending disaster. Every orc warrior who was about to be hit felt a tingling sensation on their scalps. None of the orcs panicked, and none of them retreated. They continued to roar as they charged. After 10 seconds, a sea of crimson flames descended from the sky, covering the orcs' already somewhat messy and loose charging formation. More than 800 orc warriors were directly turned into ashes, and twice that number of orcs became burning human-shaped torches, struggling and rolling in the flames. It could be imagined that in a moment, they would become charred corpses. Next, it was time to harvest. That was what the elven infantrymen thought as they advanced with the kite shield in one hand. No army could maintain their morale in a situation where they had suffered such a blow. That was what their instructors said when they were training. Unfortunately, they encountered an exception. Even though more than half of their compatriots had been swallowed by the flames, the orcs whose bodies were relatively intact still launched a frenzied charge. "This is impossible," a female mage beside Kale, that's cried out in shock. Kale, that's narrowed his eyes. He pretended to be calm, but the others could hear a trace of trembling in his voice. "Marksman unit, kill." The charging orcs were already very scattered, and it would be a waste to carry out a blanket attack. Originally, the remaining few hundred orcs should have been handled by the infantrymen. A strong sense of crisis made Kale, that's give the order to finish off the orcs. Unfortunately, his marksman unit had embarrassed him. Marksmen were elites among the rangers. Due to political reasons, the rangers of the Windrunner family were not qualified to enter the royal marksman unit. Their archery was indeed outstanding, but in reality, not many of them had experienced actual combat. They encountered orcs who continued to roar and charge even though many of their companions had died. Due to various subjective and objective reasons, many marksmen shot the orcs, but they did not hit the vital parts. That saw with his own eyes an orc with 3 arrows in his cheek, who looked like a porcupine. Even though he was covered in blood, he still killed his way to the front of the elven infantrymen. There are less than 300 orcs left. There should be no problem, right? Kale, that said to himself. What happened next almost scared him out of his wits. The elven infantryman formation was destroyed by a mere 300 orcs. Chapter 380. In the face of the orc warriors' heavy hammers, the elven warriors instinctively raised their shields to block according to the military training rules. The orc warriors' movements were too flawed. As long as they could withstand the first blow, the elven warriors would surely be able to kill these stupid and huge monsters in the next round of counterattacks. If they could block the first blow, as if they were rammed by a rampaging rhinoceros, a terrifying force so great that even their brains were instantly numbed came crashing down. Completely unprepared, most of the elven warriors were directly sent flying backwards, knocking over their comrades behind them. Still in midair, the elves next to them could already see that the victim's left arm was unnaturally twisted. There were at least 10 places on the victim's arm that were bent, and a good arm had suddenly become like a snake. Needless to say, it was a completely comminuted fracture caused by the tremendous force. It didn't matter if the orc warriors were chopping, lifting, or sweeping. Every heavy blow was bound to send at least one elven warrior and his armor flying into the air. That kind of violent power easily exceeded the elven's closed and poor imagination. The orcs, who had entered melee combat, were on a killing spree. More than 200 huge holes immediately appeared on the entire front line. Baron Segunar, who had just argued with Aurelia, was on the front line. He himself was hit by an orc's heavy hammer on his shield, but a powerful force far beyond his own saved his life. Even though he managed to withstand it, There was still a burning sensation in his left arm. His left arm was strained. But his adjutant next to him wasn't so lucky. Even his shield was directly broken into 3 pieces. The orc directly smashed his adjutant's brains with a backhand hammer. Sagunnar, whose face was covered in dirt, barely managed to deal with the orc in front of him with a single sword strike, but he suddenly found that there was no one around him. He glanced around and couldn't help but feel sad. More than 50 elven warriors around him had been crippled by a single round of attacks from a mere 10 dead orcs. Although only a dozen or so had actually died in battle, the rest either had broken arms and could no longer fight, or were directly scared silly. They wouldn't be able to participate in battle for a while. Not to mention that more orcs were rushing out of the fog at this time. Cover fire. Don't stop. Kale, that's order was as strict as a textbook. If he didn't want his vanguard to collapse, it was necessary to temporarily suppress the enemy's offensive. In theory, the flames that could destroy all armed forces in the world descended once again, roasting the earth and burning the enemies that rushed out. However, not a single enemy fell. This was because these enemies had bodies that were even bigger and sturdier than the orcs. They had 2 heads and a few dazzling defensive spells. Fire protection was able to absorb fire damage. Ice shield that could absorb all damage. Magic suppression, which reduced magic damage and healing. If he said that this wasn't targeted, he would be lying to a fool. These gigantic monsters that could fight, resist, and cast magic were taking heavy steps that could shake the earth. They cast all sorts of instant-cast magic against the elven mages while rapidly approaching the elven infantry, which was already on the verge of collapsing. Kale, that's face turned green. Order the arcane automatons and mountain giants to charge. At this point in the battle, Kale, that's felt very aggrieved. He had no choice but to invest the High Elves' land ace in advance. Using arcane automatons as guards had always been Silvermoon City's policy. This could make up for the lack of melee ability of the elves. The mountain giants, on the other hand, were different. Strictly speaking, the mountain giants were recruited after the great druid of the night elves communicated with the mountain giants and obtained their approval. As the high elves were exiled, the current Kuel Salis basically lost contact with the mountain giants. These 10 mountain giants were recruited with the help of a few druids who were willing to follow the high elves to the Lordaeron continent. They could be said to be the elves' treasures. Now Kale, that's had no choice but to play this hand in advance. The appearance of the mountain giants was undoubtedly very shocking. They had a humanoid form, a huge height of more than 30 meters, and their entire bodies were made of granite. Their arms alone were as thick as a carriage. In addition, their petrified skin was enough to withstand most cold weapons, and their magic resistance was not weak. This kind of elemental creature was definitely worthy of being called a war machine. The mountain giant easily attracted the tribe's attention with a huge tree trunk as a weapon. The tribe immediately sent out a response weapon. Goblins. Compared to this terrifying creature, which was almost at the top of the food chain in Draenor, the already terrifying ogres that were 4 or 5 meters tall were just inferior versions of goblins. With a distinct inverted triangular body, a height of more than 10 meters, at least twice the speed and strength of the mountain giants, the appearance of goblins completely tipped the scales of victory in the tribe's favor. Under the siege of a few goblins, the powerful mountain giants were finished in less than 3 minutes. Not to mention the shorter and slower arcane automatons. The entire elven frontline formation had been completely destroyed. At this time, Orgrim raised the hammer of destruction, and a majestic orc picked up the huge horn that hung from the podium to the ground, gathered all the air in his lungs, and blew on it. A deep and loud battle cry pierced through the entire battlefield. In the next instant, countless heavily armed orc soldiers charged out of the fog. They were different from the orcs who were equipped like beggars. These orcs were armed to the teeth. They were clad in heavy black armor and had black helmets on their heads. The horn-shaped spikes on their shoulder plates pointed to the sky. They had a few small axes hanging on their waists, a fan-shaped shield in one hand, and a huge double-edged battle axe or warhammer in the other. Their heavy leg armor and iron shoes stepped on the verdant grassland, each step leaving a deep footprint, and the clanking sound of metal equipment as they ran became one. There was no formation, only the momentum of a rushing river. Like rivers converging into an ocean, countless elite orc soldiers gathered into a torrent of steel, like marching ants, filling up all the gaps in Kale's field of vision. They appeared all over the mountains and plains, like a tsunami on the surface of the sea when a storm rolled up. The huge wave easily destroyed everything that blocked its way along the way. No, with Prince Kale's lament, almost all the strong men around him had consciously joined the front line, trying to stabilize this collapsing front line. Chapter 381. At this time, the high elven mages were being suppressed by the two-headed ogre mages. The two-headed ogres, who were born with multiple casting abilities, were terrifying. Anyone who tried it would feel good. This wasn't a matter of 1 + 1 = 2. This was the collapse of an elf dealing with a twin mage who had completely surpassed the concept of telepathy. Not only did the two heads cast spells at the same time, they were also smart enough to use fire or ice magic to hit you, while the other used physical attacks like earth spikes. With multiple attributes and perfect coordination, they could often suppress 3 or 4 elven mages of the same level, making them unable to attack the main orc force. The spellbreakers, who were proficient in disrupting the opponent's spellcasting, were not very effective when they reached the front. This was because the two-headed ogre mages cast spells at the same time with 2 different sets of magic circuits. A spellbreaker could only block one set of circuits at a time. Unfortunately, those perverts could use more than one set of circuits. As a result, the effect of the spellbreaker was very poor. They could only reduce the enemy's combat power by less than 30%. Sharpshooters could indeed shoot arrows into the orc warrior's vitals through the gaps between the metal cans, but there were too few true sharpshooters. Even if a few orcs fell occasionally, the orcs behind them would instantly fill the gap. The elven blade throwers also wildly poured out triangular boomerangs. As long as they hit, they would definitely plow a path of blood among the orcs. The problem was that many elite orc captains were mixed in with the charging troops. Many of the more powerful fellows could even use heavy weapons to deflect the boomerangs shot by the blade throwers. At this moment, Kale's and the high-level elves finally understood what Aurelia meant by the green tide. The enemies in front of them seemed endless, giving them a sense of helplessness as if they couldn't kill all of them. At this moment, the Red Dragon army led by the Roaring Dragon orcs charged out from the huge fog. The orc armored infantry covered the mountains and plains, easily drowning the elven infantry formation. The elves' gorgeous but thin armor exploded in midair as their owners were sent flying. The troll throwers, who were armed with metal spears and had long since upgraded their shotguns to cannons, easily killed the precious spellbreakers of Silver Moon City with their spears, which had become much more powerful. The spellbreaker's slender kite shield was too small and fragile in the storm of spears. The unstoppable two-headed ogre charged at the front lines, using unimaginable strength and agility that surpassed the concept of ogres, swiftly dismantling the arcane constructs into scraps of components. The mountain giants roared, but their clumsy movements had no effect on Gollin, whose strength was not much inferior to theirs, and whose agility was a notch higher. Each Gorin had an orc sitting on a chair nailed to the Gorin's back, using chains to control the Gorin's movements. The chains were connected to a series of iron rings embedded in Gerald's arms. It was cruel, bloody, but effective. As long as the chains were pulled, the half-tamed Gerald would know to turn or dodge. Unless there was an elven ranger who could shoot down the drivers, these enslaved Gollins were the most terrifying war machines. However, this was not easy. Every driver was an orc from a small clan who had been strengthened by the storm altar. They often had wind shields on them. Arrows that were shot directly were bound to be deflected by the strong wind. This was a war where they were suppressed in all aspects. In almost every aspect, the elves were suppressed by the horde. In the middle of the battlefield, there was an elven flag that was particularly eye-catching. On a red background, there was a golden flame. It was the Eternal Flame Legion. This was the first infantry regiment established by the High Elves after they came east from Kalimdor. It had participated in the Founding War, the first defense of Silver Moon City, and the Troll War 3,000 years ago. Back then, Even when facing the terrifying First Legion of the Amani Troll Empire, the arrogant troll elites who outnumbered them 3-1, they still suffered defeat in front of them. Back then, the founding king of Kuel Salis, Dasmare Sunstrider, had said that this was an army that had truly inherited the pioneering spirit of Quell, Dorii, the High Elves, and was forged with iron will. With an undying fighting spirit, they could definitely fight to the last soldier on the battlefield. But now, this army was almost completely wiped out. When the left and right wings began to collapse, none of the elves among them ran away. They didn't lose to willpower. Instead, they, who were still fighting in the old world, had lost to the new era. They had lost to the stronger and better-equipped Blackrock clan army. The few remaining flags did not last long in the green tide. In the blink of an eye, they were completely submerged. Kale, who was on the command platform, collapsed on the spot when he saw an orc raise the broken Eternal Flame war flag high up. His pale lips muttered, "It's over! It's over! Everything is over!" For his expedition, the Eternal Flame Legion that his father had temporarily transferred to him had actually been completely wiped out in less than 10 minutes in the battle against the Horde. How could he have the face to go back and see his father? The Legion had been completely wiped out, and the war flag had been taken. Anyone who had a slight understanding of the High Elves' military system would understand. The Eternal Flame Legion had completely disappeared from this reality. Its former prestige and all of its glorious history had been taken away by the orcs. In this moment of humiliation, it had completely disappeared from this land. Kale, had almost succeeded in committing suicide. A graceful female mage threw herself at Kale, She was the great astromancer Solarian, a loyal supporter of Prince Kale, Your Highness. Retreat first. Kuel Salis can't live without you. Otherwise, the royal blood will be severed. Let's retreat first and win it back later. More loyal Kale, pounced forward and held Kale, back. When Kale, waved the retreat flag on the command platform, the entire elven front line collapsed like an avalanche. The elves cried and wailed. They threw away all their weapons and equipment, turned around, and ran. The greatest taboo on the battlefield was to collapse. Especially when the opponent's speed was no less than their own, collapsing was a nightmare. The orcs laughed and smashed the remaining elves into meat paste. The trolls laughed maniacally and nailed slender elves to the ground with the metal spears provided by the orcs. Looking at the dying elves who were struggling and twisting on the ground like frogs waiting to be dissected, the trolls vented the hatred that had accumulated for thousands of years. The murderous trolls naturally continued to chase the elves, while the psychopathic trolls began the most inhumane killing. They slowly tore these handsome men and beautiful women into pieces. Chapter 382. The trolls used their hook-like fingers, huge palms, and powerful arms to tear off the flesh of the elves piece by piece. Accompanied by the endless wails of despair and pain was the twisted, hearty laughter of the trolls. The beautifully carved armor could not withstand a blow from the heavy weapons of the orcs. Gorgeous magic could not destroy the enemies that came at them like a tide. Terrified, the mages tore open their magic robes so that they could run faster. Kale, even heard a noble female elf mage beg a chocobo cavalryman to take her with him. She was even willing to give up everything for this. In the end, all she got was a lifetime of cold and selfish sneer. Kale, did not retreat immediately. He activated all the magic circuits in his body and frantically threw long-distance fireballs at the densest part of the battlefield. As a radiant moon mage, the power of his rage was quite astonishing. The continuous fireballs formed a small belt of fire, blocking a considerable portion of the orcs' advance. In the past, Kale, actions would have been enough to win him a round of applause. There were no cheers, no praises. None of the elves saved by Kale, dared to look up at their prince. They all lowered their heads and ran wildly. However, when an even larger two-headed ogre mage appeared and used magic that was not inferior to Kale, magic to shoot at him, the situation took a turn for the worse. On this day, the undefeatable legend of the two-headed ogre mage was branded in the hearts of the proud high elves for the first time. Faster casting speed, higher density of elemental particles, and more perfect coordination. Fighting with a two-handed ogre mage felt no different from fighting a team of experienced mages of the same level. Your Highness, let's go! Astromancer Caponia used her fire magic to share Kale, that's burden. Baron Siguna, who had rushed back from the front lines, used his powerful arm strength to drag Kale, that's away. Kale, that's did not want to leave. He wanted to be the one to bring up the rear. But everything was over. His army collapsed like a landslide. In the distance, on the black land that had been scorched by the fire, the pale stone limbs of the mountain giants were scattered all over the ground. These enormous guardian spirits that the elves had to look up to at all times were now crawling in the middle of the battlefield as if they were in a deep sleep. The sleeping mountain giant was no different from a small hill. Kael'thas knew that it had fallen asleep forever. He recognized this mountain giant. When he was very young, when he was officially declared the crown prince by his father had personally awakened this giant named Little. He still remembered how gentle Xiao Xiao was. She didn't even want to disturb the birds that were nesting on her. After the elves moved all the nests away, they happily carried him around the edge of the Long Song forest, even though he was still young. He still remembered how insufferably arrogant he looked when he stood on Xiao Xiao's body. He told himself, I will become the king of this land, and Xiao Xiao will be my moving castle. At that time, he felt that Xiao Xiao was so powerful and impossible to defeat. But now, after being attacked countless times by the huge and ferocious Gorons with their huge claws covered in steel, Xiao Xiao finally lost all signs of life and aura. Xiao Xiao was no longer a powerful elemental creature. It returned to the origin of Mother Earth and became a pile of stones again. Mountain giant Xiao Xiao, no, Kael'thas cried. The eastern temple was clearly behind him, and the distance of 2,000 meters would normally be covered in a short walk. But such a short distance was completely covered by the high elves. On the battlefield, Orgrim rode a tall wolf and found Zhu Jin, who was covered in blood. Zhu Jin, how is it? Doesn't it feel good to be a brother of the beastmen? Ha! Orgrim laughed boldly. Zhu Jin, who was covered in blood, stuck out his long tongue and licked the elven flesh on his fangs. He revealed an extremely satisfied grin. The taste of revenge is great. My great chief, but it's not enough. This is not enough to vent the hatred of the Amani Empire for 6,000 years. Only with the destruction of Silvery Moon and the extinction of the High Elves can the souls of the tens of thousands of angry great demons rest in peace. Orgrim patted Zhu Jin's shoulder. Then what are you waiting for? Follow me. If you're too slow, don't complain that the beastmen didn't leave a few living elves for you. Ha! Looking at Orgrim's back, Zhu Jin showed a rare expression of admiration. He whistled and summoned his velociraptor mount, catching up with large strides. Prince Kael'thas had almost died for his country. Before he reached the defensive range of the Eastern Temple, he was caught up by the tribal heroes led by Gyujar. The chief of the Shattered Palm clan, Kargath Bladefist, had been summoned by Ghoul Dan using a teleportation spell. He used his frenzied and fast slashes to beat Sigunnar like a dog. Gyujar used his advantage of two-headed combo attacks to easily suppress Kael'thas by himself. The chief of the Dragonmaw clan, Zuluhid, suppressed the two Astromancers, Caponia and Solarian, by himself. Kael'thas' subordinate, Saladre, was being beaten to a pulp by a sword saint of the Fireblade clan. It was only a matter of time before he died. At this moment, the arrows came. The mysterious and shadowless fierce wind arrow. The domineering lightning arrow. The two arrows had completely different feelings. They clearly came from the hands of two female elves wearing green capes, but it made people feel as if they had mobilized two armies of archers. The overwhelming pressure made it hard for the heroes of the tribe to breathe. A beastman driver tried to have a Goblin attack the two elves, who knew that with just one arrow, the huge Goblin's head and the driver's head on its back would both be shot in the head. The scene of two heads, one big and one small, exploding like rotten watermelons was shocking. It had to be known that the archer was still 300 meters away. Your Highness, please retreat. It was Aurelia Windrunner's voice. Kael'thas was ashamed. He brought his companions and retreated with his tail between his legs. Even though he left behind a thank you, he could not hide his embarrassment. That night, the tribe used a huge metal wheel that was as tall as a 7-story building as a siege vehicle. It withstood the bombardment of the magic equipment on the temple and forced the battle into hand-to-hand combat. After 3 hours of fighting, the Eastern Temple's defense line fell. On the second day after Kael'thas escaped back to Silvermoon City, the triumphant council thought that they had finally found a chance to attack the royal family. They criticized Kael'thas for his poor command, causing the death of 20,000 elite high elves in battle. At the same time, they issued a motion to restrict the royal power and announced that the pillars of the high elves, formed by the private soldiers and high-level mages of the council, would personally kill all the invaders in the Long Song Forest. However, a day later, the bad news of the destruction of the 40,000 High Elves' army came. The High Elves were in a desperate situation. Chapter 383. Sun King Anastrian's heart was bleeding. Prince Kael'thas' heart was bleeding. The members of the Silvermoon Council, who were usually high and mighty, all lowered their heads. Not only that, but almost every elf in the magnificent palace lowered their prideful heads. The allied forces of the orcs and trolls had already killed their way to the great Silvermoon City. The magic defense system that they were so proud of was once again broken by a warlock named Gul'dan. Looking into the distance, the Sun King's crow's feet were already dripping with tears. He still remembered that the founder of the kingdom, Disrima, had organized the High Elves to disperse and restrain the trolls while continuing to move north. After experiencing countless hardships, they found a paradise in the forest. It was a place that could maintain the bloodline of the High Elves. It was near the mountains and the sea, easy to defend and difficult to attack. The land was plentiful and the spring was beautiful. Disrima sprinkled the bottle of eternal water into a small lake here, creating another well of eternity, today's Well of the Sun. He named this place Kuel-Salis. He named the new city Silvermoon City and personally drew up the architectural blueprint of Silvermoon City, retaining the luxurious and aesthetic architectural style of the High Elves. In order to distinguish themselves from his compatriots who stayed in Kalimdor, and to always remember their former noble identity, Disrima renamed the High Elves who moved to Kuel-Salis Dorii, High Elves, implying that we are no longer the nobles of the lower races, but have higher intelligence and have since broken away from the Dorii clan that their ancestors used for generations. Before Silvermoon City was completely completed, the High Elves who had obtained a new life couldn't wait to support Disrima as king. Yes, they needed a king, a strong person who could control the overall situation. Disrima was undoubtedly the most suitable choice. He was brave, decisive, ambitious, tolerant, yet cunning, agile, cold, and proud. All the qualities that a king should have could be found in him without exception, and even more valuable qualities could be found. He was the first king of Kuel-Salis, Disrima Sunstrider. This was the origin of the Sunstrider royal family. In the Troll War that lasted thousands of years, the High Elves were almost wiped out. At that time, the successor of the royal family, Anastrian, personally made the decision to ask the humans for help. For 2,800 years, the Silvermoon Parliament had always used the reason that the king had given in too much to the humans to attack the king and fight for more power. At this moment, the Sun King, who was sitting on the supreme throne, did not say a word, and his sharp eyes swept across the Silvermoon councillors one by one. Every member of Parliament felt their scalps go numb. The Sun King turned around slightly. His red robe with golden edges was like the rising sun swallowing the darkness. He moved on the throne, and his pale but still powerful hand held the golden phoenix scepter tightly. The scepter still reflected the glory of the palace, blooming with a golden luster like the sun. His pale face had lost all expressions of joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. It was cold, indifferent, and calm. The voice of the Sun King finally sounded in the hall. Counselors of the Silvermoon Council, when I asked for your help as the king, you only gave my son a mediocre army to fight against the brutal orcs. You have the best elites you can imagine in your hands. If my son's failure was exchanged for your success, it would be a victory for the High Elves, after all. But now, how are you going to repay me for my concession? The Sun King imitated the voice of the former Silver Moon Council president. We have General Phoenix. The next moment, the Sun King's voice was replaced by the terrified cry of the messenger. Your Majesty, bad news. Phoenix was killed by the Orc chief, Liker. The voice changed again. We have Arcane Master Rusfang. Your Majesty, bad news again. Master Rusfang was killed by the two-headed ogre, Gujar. Every time the Sun King changed his voice, it was like a huge slap on the faces of the remaining Silver Moon counselors. Every counselor's face was burning, and they could not help but lower their heads. Finally, a counselor could not help but say, Your Majesty, we can actually ask for help from the humans, if you want to go to the Silver Moon Council. I was scolded by you for 2,800 years because I asked for help back then. This time, if you don't go, then the bloodline of the Sunstrider royal family will end in Silver Moon City. Your Majesty? In the hall, almost every high elf noble exclaimed. The king had nothing to lose and was determined to hang on to the end. After all, there were less than 30,000 soldiers left in Silver Moon City. Although they could organize people with combat power to defend, rushing into battle was no different from killing the goose that laid the golden eggs. It seemed that Silver Moon City could not be defended by the elves alone. If Silver Moon City was breached, no one would have a good ending. They would definitely not be able to return to the Kalimdor continent. There would be no place for the high elves on this continent that was full of smoke and flames of war. Cold sweat soaked the backs of all the counselors. Your Majesty, please think carefully. The counselors shouted. The Sun King seemed to have lost his hearing. He sat on the throne like an ice sculpture, not saying a word. Just like that, he quietly watched the commotion below. Kale, that's wanted to say something, but in the end, his body trembled violently and he stopped moving. At this moment, a large group of nobles and counselors finally thought of an elf. One who had been ignored by all the elves because she had an affair with a foreign race, and one who had learned about the invasion of the tribe early on but did not attract the attention of the higher-ups. She was an elf who still stood in the hall with her head held high, Aurelia Windrunner. Countless pairs of eyes looked at the female ranger general who stood at the end of the hall. It was in this moment of despair that they remembered this heroine who had always been bold and outspoken but was rejected by the mainstream authorities. Servanas, who had been standing quietly beside Aurelia, suddenly raised his head and said in the whisper of the wind that outsiders could not hear, Sister, we must not be soft-hearted to these bastards. If we don't cut off these rotten meat, Kuel Salis will perish sooner or later. A counselor who had once been high and mighty walked in front of Aurelia and said in an almost flattering tone, Madam Aurelia, regarding the siege of Silver Moon City, the council would like to know your opinion. Agitated, angry, resentful about why the high elves kept so many parasites, roaring about why the higher-ups were not willing to listen to any pertinent opinions. But when the higher-ups really condescended to listen to her opinion, Aurelia felt a wave of indifference. That's right, it was a kind of indifference that came from a dead heart. I have no opinion, Aurelia replied calmly. Chapter 384. Didn't Aurelia love Kuel Salis? She loved her country more than any other elf. As the saying went, the deeper the love, the deeper the hatred. The first time Duque had informed her, she had rushed back to warn the tribe when they were far away in the hinterlands. She had been ignored. She had even been given the Roaring Parliament's high hat. The second time she had barged into the Silver Moon Parliament when the runestone magic circle was broken. There seemed to be some progress, but she immediately realized that the Sun King and the Parliament were still bickering for power when the enemy was right in front of them. A group of higher-ups who had never been willing to understand their enemy had pulled out a small team of trump cards and miscellaneous people, and they had delusions of defeating the well-prepared elite army of 100,000 tribes? Without a doubt, Prince Kale, that's first expedition brought the most terrible consequences. Then, the Parliament tried to stand out, and with the goal of suppressing the royal family's party, They also didn't want to understand their enemy, so they went to deliver food to Orgrim and Zujin. The royal family's army of 25,000 was defeated, and less than 5,000 returned. The 40,000 Parliament's elite troops were all annihilated, and less than 400 returned. In addition to the guards lost at the border, more than 70,000 High Elves died in battle in a short week. If you added the civilians who couldn't retreat in time, it was 150,000. The High Elves couldn't compare to humans in terms of population. In contrast to their long lifespan, they had a low fertility rate. The High Elves generally didn't like to raise their offspring too early. It wasn't unusual for a generation to occur every 1,000 years. This caused the total population of the High Elves to never exceed 1 million. How much money did the High Elves have to waste? Aurelia had cried, begged, felt sad, and felt hopeless. Even though Duque had warned her time and time again that the higher-ups of Silvermoon City were a bunch of bastards who didn't care about the lives of the people and held each other back for power. Before experiencing all of this, Aurelia had always had a trace of hope and longing for the Sun King and the Parliament. Until this moment, the cruel reality showed her that there was no end to courting death. Countless wooden stakes were erected in the open space outside Silverymoon City, each with a dead elf stuck in it. Every 15 minutes outside the city, a group of elves would be beheaded by the cruel trolls as they wailed in despair. Aurelia finally gave up on the Sunstrider royal family and the Silvermoon Council. Unexpectedly, when they were at the end of their rope, this group of fellows, who were like rats trying to escape from a sinking ship, suddenly remembered Duque's army. The elite troops that had been waiting at the border since the beginning were strictly forbidden from entering. The reinforcements that Aurelia had pulled over at all costs. Aurelia's cold reply was a challenge to the hearts of the counselors. After playing the political game for thousands of years, these counselors had long since developed a way to deal with almost any situation. Agreeing was not the same as agreeing completely. He refused because the price was too low. He firmly refused because the price was ridiculously low. These counselors, who had spent their entire lives in the political game, were most afraid of encountering this kind of complete disregard. The other party refused to communicate with you, which in itself meant that there was no need to talk. It was only then that the counselors remembered that Duque had sent a liaison officer to Silverymoon City. They quickly gave up on Illyria, who was a tough nut to crack, and turned their attention to the diplomat who was just as young. Ilusia Barov, the eldest daughter of the Alterac aristocrat Duke Barov's family, and the student of the Alliance's deputy commander, Gambler Marcus? This qualification would not be ignored in front of the king of any human kingdom. Only the arrogant elves would dare to leave her in the state guesthouse and ignore her for a full 10 days. The only problem was that this Miss Barov had the same shocking age as her master. She was only 16 years old this year. 16 years old might be an age that was easy to induce, but 16 years old could also be a time bomb, because youth represented impulsiveness. Just the thought of a hothead with a great weapon of mass destruction made every politician's scalp tingle. This was because all the predictions of their thinking patterns and adult rules might not necessarily apply to such people. They worried too much. Ilusia, who had been ignored for 10 days, did not feel any excitement, anger, or joy, because Duque had told her that she might be treated like this. In fact, Duque did not want a young lady like Ilusia to suffer in the military camp. Even if mages always received the best treatment, it would never be as comfortable as the Dalajan or her home, Caer Darren. Ilusia had an audience with the king. She was dressed impeccably. She had a head full of beautiful black hair, a perfectly fitted forehead ornament and necklace, and a set of elegant blue mage robes. She had the air of a quiet lady. Even the High Elves, who were extremely picky about their clothes and appearance, could not find fault with Ilusia at all. Ilusia Barov, disciple of Grand Duke Marcus of Stormwind City, greets the Sun King and the counselors of the Silvermoon Council. The almost formal greeting did not reveal any information. The Sun King nodded. The Silvermoon Council has something to discuss with you. With that, he closed his eyes and remained motionless as if he had been hit by a petrifying spell. Councillor Morlens was now the acting chairman. This high and mighty radiant moon mage bit the bullet and stepped out. he said to Elucia. To be honest, Quel Salis is currently in a bit of a predicament. The Silver Moon Council would like to express their gratitude to Grand Duke Marcus for taking the initiative to come to their aid. Now, we would like to discuss if the Lordaeron Alliance is willing to start negotiations for new members. Elucia's first words almost choked Morlens to death. I can only represent the opinion of Grand Duke Marcus, not the Lordaeron Alliance. If you have something to discuss with the Alliance, I suggest that you look for the chief commander of the Alliance, Lord Lothar, or the most influential king in the Alliance, His Majesty Menethil. This was clearly making things difficult for them. Everyone knew that Lothar and King Menethil were fighting anxiously in the Silver Pine Forest. They could barely take care of themselves. Who would care about Quel Salis, who was far away and had given the Alliance enough face in the past? The only thing they could count on was Duque, the deputy commander of the Alliance, and his troops. The group of counselors was beaten to the point of vomiting blood by Elucia's Tai Chi. Morlens had no choice but to ask, what if the Silver Moon Council wishes to have a face-to-face formal meeting with Sir Marcus? Sure. But as the price for treating my teacher coldly, there must be an additional condition. Chapter 385. Their lives were in the other party's hands, and they had to bow their heads. Even if they knew that taking the initiative to ask was handing over the initiative, did the elves still have the initiative to speak of? Morlens could only ask on behalf of Speaker, what conditions? Elucia smiled brilliantly, her smile like thousands of flowers blooming at the same time, but the content of her words embarrassed every elf to the extreme. Their faces were covered with shame and anger, because she said, please spread the red carpet from the Traveller's Square all the way to the Tower of Sun Fury. At the same time, open all the main doors from the square to the Sun-Chasing King Court, and then to the Tower of Sun Fury. Welcome, my teacher. The speaker almost bit his tongue off. Even the human kings had never received such treatment. There had only been 2 such grand welcoming ceremonies in the entire history of Silvery Moon. One was the first entry ceremony after Silvery Moon was built. Thousands of elves welcomed the first elven king, Darima Sunstrider, with flowers and cheers. This was to celebrate his success in finally leading the people to establish a country in this strange land. The other was after the victory over the trolls, when Silvery Moon held a triumphant ceremony for a Nastrian Sunstrider, the highest hero in the hearts of the people at that time. Such a grand welcoming ceremony, the proud elves would never hold such a grand ceremony for any outsider. Now that Elucia mentioned it, Morlens screamed on the spot. This is impossible. What right does Marcus have to enjoy such a grand treatment? Teacher is the hero of the world of Azeroth who can kill the tribes the most. 50,000 in the Elven Forest. 100,000 in Stormwind City. 100,000 in the first battle of Southshore. 100,000 in the Battle of Paladin. 100,000 in the second Battle of Southshore. 50,000 in the Battle of Earthy Highlands. A total of 500,000 tribes were kicked into hell by Teacher to repent for their sins. Isn't that enough? Elucia proudly raised her head. If she only gave people the feeling of a lady just now, now she was a high and mighty god overlooking all life. Admittedly, this battle record was more or less exaggerated. It was an indisputable fact that Duque personally commanded these battles as the Alliance's deputy commander, and it was not wrong to put the battle record on Duque's head. The enemy's enemy is my hero. Just based on the number of beasts killed, Duque was worthy of this courtesy. Morlens was speechless for a moment. After a long time, he said, the High Elves have never opened the gate of the Sunstrider Royal Court for a foreign hero. Then there's nothing to talk about. Elucia said firmly. What she was doing was not the kind of, are you going to lower the price or not? Like buying vegetables in the market. If you don't bargain, I'll leave. It was obviously a pretentious negotiation method. Elucia responded to Morlens with a mocking sneer. She turned around elegantly, her long hair flying in the air in a beautiful arc. Then, without moving her shoulders, she strode out of the hall gracefully and firmly. Clean, efficient, and without any leeway. Chairman Morlens, who had been through countless negotiations, was dumbfounded. He really wanted to believe that Elusia was faking it. But no matter from Eluxia's heartbeat, breath, or expression, Eluxia was taking pleasure in others' misfortune. He was right. All the counselors in the hall, the Sun King and Prince Kale, had guessed correctly. Elusia and Duque, who was behind her, really did not care about the life and death of the elves. Duque's last command echoed in Elusia's mind. The only thing I care about is the Windrunner sisters. Not because of personal relationships, but because of the special value they possess. As for the elves, if they are still so arrogant and look down on others at the moment when their city is about to be destroyed, then let them drown with their ridiculous arrogance. What did the High Elves' extinction have to do with Elusia? After Duque announced that they could win this battle without the elves, Elusia was even more confident. This was not a political tactic, but a true sense of indifference. 1 step, 2 steps, 10 steps, 20 steps. With every step Elusia took, her light and graceful footsteps made the hearts of the counselors sink. The situation seemed to have returned to 2,800 years ago, when the elves were about to be wiped out. Humans could live without the elves. But the elves could not live without the help of humans. After losing 2 battles in a row, and with the horde at their gates, the High Elves were no longer the transcendent race that could sit on their own side and watch the other races fight to the death. A fallen phoenix was no better than a chicken. Now, Quel Salus was that chicken. Aurelia, who had the best relationship with Duque, was disheartened. The counselors' attempts to get her out of the way were met with indifference. The way to make it public was about to be blocked. It would be strange if the counselors were not anxious. The Sunstrider royal family, who should have been the most restless, was determined to bury Silvermoon City with them. The Sun King and Kale, both had a dead look on their faces. The counselors were as anxious as ants on a hot pan. If there was absolute evidence that Aurelia was Duque's woman, perhaps the counselors would even do something like kidnapping and blackmailing. But that was just wishful thinking. No matter how weak the Windrunner family was, they were still the leader of the Rangers. If they made a move on Aurelia now, wouldn't all the most useful Rangers in the defense of the city turn traitor? Unknowingly, Elusia had already walked to the door of the hall. She said calmly, "Please open the teleportation circle outside the council hall. I will leave now and return to my teacher." The guard captain at the door was in a dilemma. He did not know whether to agree or not. He could not say a single word for a long time. At this moment, all the counselors in the hall cast their murderous gazes on Morlens. If gazes were swords, Morlens would have been stabbed countless times and lying in a pool of blood. Taking one last look at the Sun King, who was determined to die for his country, Morlens knew that if he let Elusia go, he would not live to see tomorrow's morning sun. Once it was dark, he would be cut into pieces and thrown out of the city to be fed to the ogres. "Miss Barev, please stay. The Silvermoon Council is willing to initiate a motion to request the Sun King, a Nastrian Sunstrider, to agree to open the main gate of the Sunstrider court and welcome the arrival of the Alliance's hero, His Excellency Duke Marcus. Counselors, those who agree with this motion, please raise your hand." Morlens stared fiercely at the counselors behind him. "All right, you bastards are forcing me to lose face, aren't you? If you want to lose face, I'll lose it together. I'll deal with whoever disagrees first." What was the result? Of course, it was unanimously approved. The Sun King, a Nastrian, finally opened his murky eyes. "Since this is an official motion of the Silvermoon Council, for the continuation of Quel Salus, I agree." All right, the biggest obstacle had been cleared. With a victorious expression on her face, Elusia connected to Duke's magical communication and informed him of what had happened here. Unexpectedly, Duque's words choked all the elves present. "Negotiation? I'm not free." Chapter 386. Aren't you high elves so arrogant? Aren't you elves cold and aloof, like you're the best in the world and everyone owes you money? For Aurelia's sake, I've come all the way here, but I've been left outside your borders to eat dust. This feels so good. All right. You don't listen. You don't understand. You know but don't do it. You can't do it well. I sent you reinforcements, but you don't use them. You have to use your precious troops to send food. Are you King Sun King and the Silver Moon Council courting death? As a transmigrator, Duque didn't have much resentment towards the High Elves. But when Duque truly experienced the arrogant and domineering temperament of the High Elves, Duque said, "I don't want to serve you anymore." Now that Duque said, "I'm not free," the High Elves were furious. "I'm finally willing to serve you with the highest treatment, and you're saying you're not free." This time, even Prince Kale, that's eyelids twitched a few times. If he was just putting on airs, Duque was undoubtedly going overboard. Of course, Duque wasn't that stupid. His reason was even more dignified. In the mirror image, Duque had a regretful look on his face. "Sorry, I'm sorry. I originally planned to help you deal with the main force of the great tribal chief, but I saw that Kuel Salis didn't seem to need support. On the other side, King Menethil urged me more than 10 times to help deal with the tribal division that was causing destruction near Darrowshire. So, I transferred the 30,000-strong army away." With that, Duque turned the camera to show the scene of a fierce battle all over the mountains and plains. It wasn't actually a fierce battle. The elves noticed that the humans had gained the absolute upper hand. The human soldiers were methodically surrounding and annihilating the tribes. Considering that Duque was the deputy commander of the alliance, it was completely reasonable for him to deal with the tribes in the territories of the alliance first. Who told the High Elves not to join the alliance? At this moment, all the counselors felt so regretful that their intestines turned green. Countless resentful gazes turned towards the Silver Moon Counselor Dalkin, who had given the 8 countries a hard time. Everyone knew that Dooku was trying to get back at him. He was forcing the High Elves to choose between pride and riches. In fact, there wasn't much to choose from. Moral integrity was something that could easily be lost after it had been lost once. 2,800 years ago, the elves sought help from the humans and had no choice but to teach them magic in exchange for the humans' support. 2,800 years later, the elves would only lose their moral integrity once more. Now that the Silver Moon Council had admitted defeat, the Sun King would not exterminate the Silver Moon Council when they were in urgent need of manpower in front of the enemy. Even if they were the worst political enemies, their power as archmages would still come in handy when the enemy was at the gates. The Sun King winked at his son. Kale, that's immediately stepped forward. "Duque, the High Elves need your help. Could I trouble you to come to Silver Moon City as soon as possible?" As he said this, Kale, that's looked at Aurelia, who was standing at the end of the hall. The eyes of this gentle and elegant prince were full of pleading. He was going to play the emotional card. If it were someone else, Aurelia would definitely not care. But not Kale, that's. Back then, Aurelia had given Duque the mage apprentice's notebook that belonged to Kale, that's. She had been sentenced to 3 months because of Kale, that's pleading. Otherwise, with the political influence of the Windrunner family, she would have been sentenced to 1 year at best, or 3 years in prison at worst. Aurelia's mouth moved slightly, and a breeze quietly drifted to Eleusia's ear. Eleusia immediately understood. She did not do anything but let the camera shine on Aurelia. Duque understood on the spot. "All right, when I've dealt with the leader of this division, I'll come over as soon as possible." When Duque said this, the head of the leader of this division, General Nagjar, was right next to Duque's hand. In the original trajectory of history, if Nagjar had been allowed to continue growing, perhaps he would have become a famous tribal hero. Unfortunately, his opponent was Duque. After learning that the annihilation of Hindlands had ended, Duque immediately left an empty camp with less than 300 people outside the Elven Kingdom's border. The main force immediately turned around and joined up with Seamus' division. Cudrin Wildhammer was also very generous. Ever since the pinnacle battle at the wine table, Cudrin personally brought the entire Griffin Knight Regiment. The Air Force Regiment seemed to be a little smaller in terms of numbers, with only 1,000 riders. But considering the terrifying combat power of an adult Griffin that could easily take out 20 infantrymen without panting, a Griffin Knight Regiment was actually no less than the combat power of 50,000 people. Apart from that, Cudrin also supported a heavy infantry regiment of 3,000 people from the Eagle Nest Mountain. This time, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Kudrin had emptied his entire base. Flying in the sky and blocking on the ground, the annihilation of this dwarven division was also reasonable. Moreover, Duque knew that Nogjar was ferocious, so he directly formed a team and killed this horde quasi-hero. Moreover, Gavin Rad, Reginald, Kudrin, and Duque, the four of them together, no matter how ferocious Nogjar was, he could only die in frustration. In fact, during the magic transmission, Duque even cheated. The background of the battle that the elves saw was actually a video recorded by Duque. The 60,000 troops were already stationed outside the Elven Kingdom's border. Hearing Duke's promise, the elves finally put down their hearts that were hanging in midair. That night, the elves held a national banquet, and the guests were Elugia and the four Windrunner sisters. If the Sun King's reward for Aurelia and the other sisters was considered normal, then the council was blatantly bribing them. For mansions in the Traveler's Square, 5 large ocean-going merchant ships, and more than 10 epic longbows, however, the more smiles the council put on, the colder Aurelia's heart became. Is this the high-ranking elves who control the life and death of hundreds of thousands of elves? Compared to Elugia's appropriate response, the 4 Windrunner sisters were like 4 pieces of wood, purely accompanying her. No matter what, after a preliminary exchange of conditions, Elugia finally promised to communicate with her master again later. As expected, she received an affirmative reply from Duque the day after tomorrow. The Dark Portal Year 2, 18th of June. This was a very special day for the High Elves. When the 100,000 ferocious horde soldiers besieged the city, Silvery Moon City used the Supreme Sunchaser ceremony to welcome the arrival of a human hero, Duke Marcus. In the 6,000 years since Silvery Moon City was founded, only 2 heroes had received such a grand welcome. They were the first king and second king of the Sunchaser royal family. In the eyes of the extremely arrogant elves, the third person to enjoy the glory of the Sunchaser ceremony should have been Prince Kael, that's whom all the elves had high hopes for. Chapter 387. It was a pity that their prince had been beaten like a dog by the tribe in the first battle. Even though the royal family and the Silver Moon Council spared no effort in publicizing Duque's glorious achievements, every elf with a brain knew that the High Elves had failed once again and had no choice but to seek help from the humans. Rather than saying that this was a grand welcoming ceremony for a hero, it would be more accurate to say that 100,000 elves had no choice but to witness the noble and noble High Elves being nailed to the pillar of shame once again. The only difference was that this wasn't a humiliating surrender ceremony, but a welcoming ceremony in the name of an ally. The Sun King and the Silver Moon Council only had one last fig leaf left. They had no choice but to urgently need this fig leaf. An army of 70,000 had been destroyed, and 90% of their land had fallen. Even the most optimistic elves did not dare to hope that the High Elves could survive this crisis alone. The panicking citizens needed confidence. The despairing and suffering soldiers needed hope. These were all things that the Sun King and the Silver Moon Council could not give to their citizens and soldiers. Duque, the most powerful orc killer in Azeroth's history, the culprit behind the deaths of 500,000 orcs. His appearance was undoubtedly a boost to the morale of the Kuel Salis elves, who were on the brink of hell. Hence, Duque's arrival had undoubtedly left the elves in a dilemma. Happiness, humiliation, unease, warmth. All sorts of emotions were running through them. At 10 in the morning, the vast Traveler's Square was already tightly surrounded by elven commoners. When their king and parliament couldn't provide them with a sense of security, it was part of their survival instinct to look for a new life-saving straw. If something happened to Duque and he could not come, or if the teleportation portal was disrupted, causing the promised reinforcements to not be able to come, the elven citizens would undoubtedly sink into a deeper despair and fear. Fortunately, Duque did not stand them up. At 10 sharp, in the middle of the square, a huge circular teleportation portal that was 5 stories tall opened. Under the illumination of the sparkling arcane energy, 10 Morning Star elven wizards in uniform rapidly helped to stabilize the portal. Under the gaze of 100,000 pairs of eyes, A rare sight in Silvery Moon appeared on the other side of the portal, followed by the orderly and rhythmic sound of hooves. Huge and pure white warhorses seemed to be performing dressage, taking rhythmic steps as they stepped out of the portal. The first thing that entered the elven citizens' sight were 12 human knights in shining armor. It was clearly the Storm Kingdom's knight armor with a silver base and blue edges. Unexpectedly, the flags they held in their hands were in a mess, with all kinds of colors. At first, some ignorant citizens sneered softly. 2 seconds later, they exclaimed from the bottom of their hearts. The war flags were the war flags of the tribes. One of the war flags had the same symbol as the one used to besiege Silver Moon City. It was the war flag of the Blackrock tribe. Not only were there flags, but there were also a dozen huge orc heads frozen with ice magic. Banners written in the elven language were inserted into the ice, announcing the identities of these heads. Surprisingly, each of these heads belonged to a tribal chief. Among them, the most eye-catching were the words "Head of the Great Tribal Chief Black Hand." That's right. That's right. These Alliance Knights were displaying the Alliance's achievements to the elves with the attitude of victors. They were displaying Duke's great achievements. Behind the 12 knights were the 12 Earth Wizards. As soon as they appeared, they lined up neatly on both sides, bowing at a 45-degree angle as they awaited the arrival of the most important person. Finally, there was a loud sound in the sky, and Duke made a dazzling appearance. Accompanied by the deafening thunder, Duke appeared in the teleportation portal, enveloped by a tornado formed from 5 different elements. A wriggling chain of lightning, a violently spinning gale shield, an incomparably scorching snake of flames, a bone-chilling barrier of ice, an incomparably mysterious light of arcane magic. 5 different types of power could actually blend together harmoniously, turning into 12 spinning elemental energy balls that floated above Duke's head. Duke's move directly defeated Prince Kale, who always had 3 arcane energy balls floating above his head. In fact, it was not just Kale, Acting Chairman Morlands, who had been waiting at the side, also had an awkward expression on his face. Duke's people were invited by the Silver Moon Council on their knees. Even if the other party was obviously trying to humiliate them, the Silver Moon Council could only swallow it. Morlands pretended not to see anything, and put on a warm face as he followed Elugia to welcome him. "Welcome, Teacher Duke. Duke, you're here. My father is already waiting for you. I am Acting Chairman Morlands. I represent the Silver Moon Council in welcoming you, Your Excellency Grand Duke Marcus." 3 people, 3 different forms of address, but it did not seem out of place on this occasion. Duke nodded lightly to Elugia, and the eldest daughter of the Baraf family obediently stood behind Duke. Then, Prince Kale, that's on the left, and Chairman Morlands on the right, the 2 incomparably noble elves led Duke on the red carpet towards the hall where the Silver Moon Council was located. The horns sounded to welcome the guests, and thunderous applause sounded, accompanied by cheers that reached the sky. Countless petals were scattered by beautiful elven girls from the balconies of the tall buildings on both sides of the road onto the red carpet. "Welcome, the hero of mankind. Long live the Beastman Killer Duke. Huel Salis is counting on you, Sir Marcus." No matter how much of the welcome was sincere, at least at this moment, Duke received the treatment he deserved. The arrogance of the high elves that had lingered in Silver Moon City for thousands of years seemed to have transformed into the red carpet used to welcome guests, and was ruthlessly stepped on by Duke. The corner of Duke's mouth curved into a sinister smile. "Silver Moon City, here I come, as the savior of the world. If you are willing to put down your pride, then I don't mind giving you some pointers. If you are so stubborn, then don't blame me for letting you die." Various aspects of the history of the world of Azeroth appeared in Duke's mind. It could be said that since the first opening of the Dark Portal, the history of the entire world was a history of war between the Alliance and the Horde. There might be a short period of peace, but most of the time it was a state of war. Only when a stronger enemy attacked, and when they could not fight against the foreign enemy alone, would these mortal enemies quickly resolve their conflict and turn to an alliance. In history, Orgrim's troops only circled the Long Song forest once, and then left contentedly after setting up the storm altar, leaving the suffering trolls to deal with the elves alone. Now, history had changed greatly. Without a doubt, the person who now controlled the fate of the High Elves was Duque. Walking on the red carpet, Duque clearly did not have a noble crown on his head. However, in the eyes of the elves, Duque was without a doubt an uncrowned king. Chapter 388. The Uncrowned King. It sounded nice, but most people would think that it was useless to not be a king. In fact, this majority was wrong. No one knew better than Duque, who was a transmigrator. Without the support of power, the title of king was even more meaningless than an empty title. If the orcs and trolls from the First and Second Wars were considered mortals, then the Third War at the Dark Portal would start. In that case, starting from the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, things like resurrection from the dead, the Calamity Army formed from the undead, dragons, elemental lords, ancient gods. When a large number of ordinary people saw these things that would make them piss their pants, everyone would know that any country that didn't have enough power to support it was nothing more than child's play. Only power. Only then would Duque be able to stand at the peak of the world's nations. Now, Duque stood there, his formless power like a storm, easily sweeping through the entire Traveler's Square. Tens of thousands of elves consciously formed a long line. Whether they were willing or not, they had to worship Duque and pray for Duque's salvation. It was as if a silent image was overlapping with history, just like the scene from 2,800 years ago. Accompanying the elven hero Anastrian Sunstrider into the city was the greatest emperor in human history, Thoradin the Great. Now, Anastrian had been replaced by Kael, the heroic knight king on the saddle had been replaced by the mage hero, and the leadership had changed. It was no longer the elves, but the humans. This scene made countless elves feel conflicted and sad. Duque walked on the red carpet, looking around from the corner of his eyes. He had to admit that the main city of the High Elves was indeed beautiful. There were beautiful sculptures and buildings everywhere. Even if a piece of a building were to be dismantled by the roadside and auctioned in the human world, it could be sold for a sky-high price. It had to be known that this was not the Silver Moon City that had been witnessed by the players in the future, the one that had been built next to the original ruins. This was the original Silvery Moon City. In terms of artistic value, it completely surpassed the 9 streets of the new city. Although New Silver Moon City was also very beautiful, compared to this beautiful ancient city with thousands of years of history, New Silver Moon City was more like a clumsy imitation. At this moment, Prince Kael, who was beside Duque, said softly, "Silver Moon is beautiful, right? She is the pride and greatest spiritual sustenance of the High Elves. If possible, we don't want her to be affected by the flames of war." Duque noticed that the prince used she to describe Silver Moon City, just like how humans liked to use women's names to describe warships. This kind of attachment to things was really characteristic of the elves. Duque replied, "That's exactly why I'm here." Kael, nodded and didn't say anything else. Before the negotiations reached the moment of signing, unforeseen events could still occur. The prince thought silently, as long as Duque doesn't ask for too much. The sound of drums and trumpets, as well as the noise, faded away with the end of the half-hour-long welcome ceremony. However, even though Duque's young and mysterious figure had disappeared from the entrance of the Parliament Hall, not a single elf citizen left. It was as if they were waiting for the final judgment, for the results of the negotiations. Everyone knew that the arrogance of the elves had long since angered the 7 human kingdoms and the bronze-bearded dwarves of the Cosmodan Kingdom. When the humans repeatedly asked for help, the Silver Moon Parliament had arrogantly ignored them. Now, it was the High Elves' turn to face extinction. Would the humans still be willing to lend a helping hand? None of the elves knew. In the dazzling and glorious hall, the 1,024 magic lamps arranged in all directions illuminated the hall as if it was daytime. Walking in it, one couldn't see a trace of shadow, giving people a majestic feeling as if they were walking in the temple of the sun god. The Sun King Anastrian Sunstrider, who was sitting on his throne above the 9 steps of stairs, finally stood up. He spread his arms, and his slightly aged majestic voice reverberated in the huge hall that was more than 10,000 square meters. Welcome, the Grand Duke of Stormwind City, the Orc Killer, the hero of the humans, and the great guardian candidate, Your Excellency Duke Marcus. For a king to formally call out Duke's title as the most awesome was undoubtedly a huge concession. It must be known that this kind of high-hatted greeting, when uttered by a ceremonial officer, and when uttered by a king, have two completely different meanings. Duke didn't want to provoke the elves any further. He bowed slightly so that his head was in a straight line with his back. He didn't lower his head, but purely expressed his respect for his elders. Thank you, Your Majesty, the Breaking Dawn Archmage, the Terminator of the Troll War, and the great ruler of the elves, Sun King and Astrian Sunstrider. Duke's words made the high-ranking elves, who had been laughing dryly, calm down a little. Your Excellency Marcus, may I ask if I'm talking to the Grand Duke of Stormwind City now? Or the Deputy Commander of the Rotterdam Alliance? The Sun King's words had a deeper meaning in politics. Previously, in order to avoid provoking Quel Salis, Duke could only approach the border of the elves in the name of the Grand Duke and his private army. If the high-ranking elves turned a blind eye and let Duke enter, they would let Duke stab them in the back during the first or second battle between the elves and the tribes. Then, the elves would at most think of a way to compensate Duke, and then join the alliance. Then, the matter would be over. However, the Silvermoon Council would accuse Aurelia of having an affair with Duke, and forbid Duke from entering. Alright, now that the elves' main force had been defeated, and the new soldiers had yet to be trained, they were only willing to invite Duke when their country was on the brink of extinction. If Duke insisted on holding on to this point, the elves would naturally have to continue to compensate Duke, who was the Grand Duke, for the damage to his heart and so on. Of course, Duke could do that, but he would be at a disadvantage. A smile appeared on Duke's face as he raised his hand, and a very formal document appeared in the air in front of all of the elves with the power of the arcane technique. I, Duke Marcus, have officially obtained the absolute authorization of the Rotterdam Alliance. As the Deputy Commander of the Rotterdam Alliance, I am fully responsible for the negotiation of the Kingdom of Quel Salis joining the Alliance. On it are the seals of the Commander-in-Chief and the kings of the member countries. Duke's move caught the Sun King and the Silvermoon Council off guard. No one expected Duke to have such a huge influence in the Alliance. He actually obtained the full support of the Commander-in-Chief and 8 kings in one night. At this moment, the 8 kings were fighting bloody battles against the Horde on all fronts in the world. How much trust did it take for so many crafty kings to agree to give up their power in such a short period of time? How great was Duke's prestige? All the elves gasped. At this moment, a herald suddenly ran in a hurry. Oh no, the tribes have broken through our regional magic defense, and they will attack the city at any time? Duke raised his hand, and suddenly, a flag flew out of his storage space and into Aurelia's hand. Take my flag and stick it on the city wall. Today, the chief of the tribes will naturally get lost. The elves' faces changed again. Retreat with one flag? Are you kidding me? Chapter 389. If someone else dared to do such a thing in front of a group of high-level elves, it would be enough to say that the High Elves were a superior race and a nation of etiquette if they didn't burn him to death with magic fire on the spot. At first, the reaction of all the elves was that it was ridiculous. In other words, the humans thought that Duke was showing off. Not just any show-off, but a show that was courting death. A war flag could force back a horde army of 100,000? Wasn't he afraid of being struck by lightning for showing off so much? Several counselors were about to mock him, but all of them swallowed their words. The name of a human. The shadow of a tree. Even if every counselor didn't like Duke, no one dared to deny Duke's achievements. There were many elves living in the human world, and the impact of the war had already spread to every country and city on the Lordaeron continent. There were a lot of orc heads on display outside more than one town. Duke's achievements were real. Duke's reputation was really so terrible that he could scare away the orcs with just a war flag? The elven counselors had to swallow their words and wait for the development of the situation. Duque looked at Aurelia. Aurelia also stared at Duque. This beautiful and smart elven ranger general certainly knew what Duque wanted. Duque used his wisdom to foresee a shameless and despicable power struggle. He also foresaw that this power struggle at the cost of the lives of the High Elves was destined to break Aurelia's heart. However, he still did his best to accompany her in her efforts, waiting for that 1 in a million chance of the high-level elf's brilliance. She didn't wait for that elven hope. She made things so difficult for Duque, made Duque do so much, and now it was time for her to give Duque an answer. Was she willing to use her transfer as the price in exchange for Duque's help to the High Elves for the last time? She gently closed her eyes and pondered for 2 seconds. When Aurelia's beautiful eyes appeared in front of everyone again, they were no longer confused, but incomparably determined. Aurelia Windrunner's clear and melodious voice resounded in the hall. According to His Excellency Duke Marcus' request, I will unfurl this flag and raise it high. Then I will ride on a chocobo and cross half of Silvery Moon to the top of the outer walls. I will plant this flag there and see how the horde will react. Who agrees and who objects? Her mellow voice was filled with determination. In fact, this was Aurelia's final, tearful accusation against the vermin of the country and the useless people in high positions. That's right. As long as any of you still have a bit of backbone, then step forward and use the elves' methods to solve the elves' crisis. If all of you are useless trash, then don't blame me for hiring an outsider. Who agreed? Who objected? She said it lightly, but no one dared to say anything. Everyone knew that if Duque succeeded, then Duque would become an undying legend in the history of Azeroth. At the same time, it would be a huge blow to the reputation of the Kuel Salis royal family and the parliament. But in a crisis like this where the army was pressing down on the city, one wrong word could mean the end of one's political career and even one's life. The counselors, who would speak eloquently in this hall almost every time, were all mute. After Aurelia finished speaking, she waited for a full 10 seconds. Her gaze swept from left to right, from top to bottom, back and forth between the counselors and the Sunstrider father and son. When she found that no one dared to meet her gaze, Aurelia's face revealed a sad but resolute smile. That means no one is against it? Then I'm leaving. I'm leaving. Not only did this mean that she would step out of the hall and run to the top of the city wall, it also meant that she, the Ranger General who had been loyal to Quell, the loss for thousands of years, the heroine of the High Elves, would forever leave the people she once loved, her country, with disappointment and sorrow. Prince Kael, that was deeply hurt by this scene. He almost instinctively raised his right hand, as if he wanted to ask Aurelia to stay, but he still put down his hand dejectedly. After seeing the prince's action, Aurelia opened her mouth slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she didn't say a word. She turned around and walked away. Tisk. Illyria wasn't the only one. Servanas, who was also a ranger general, also turned around and left with her sister. However, what she left behind for the counselors was the back of her head, which was even more rebellious. Time in the hall seemed to freeze. No one spoke because everyone was waiting for the result. In the end, a shocking legend would be born. Or would it create a joke that would be laughed at for 10,000 years? Every high-ranking person was looking forward to it. Aurelia strode out of the hall, and her third and fourth sisters immediately came up to her. Let's go. A certain braggart claimed that he could scare off Orgrim with a flag. Let's go and see. Without hesitation, the 4 Windrunner sisters flew up to their mounts. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, they unfurled Duque's huge blue storm emblem flag. Compared to Silvermoon City, which had red and gold as its base color, this refreshing blue was so out of place. It was so abrupt and glaring. Moreover, an elven ranger general was holding up a human noble's flag. What did this mean? The moment the flag fluttered in the wind, Aurelia truly received the attention of the crowd. Suspicion, panic, unease, questioning, complaints, anger. Almost all the emotions gathered on Aurelia's face. Her arm was firm and strong, as if she had pulled a bow millions of times. Her body was as firm as a pine tree. She was not afraid of the rumors or the attacks of hostility. However, on her beautiful face, 2 drops of tears rolled down. These are the last 2 drops of tears that I, Aurelia Windrunner, shed for my beloved country. Through the long street. Through the square. Ignoring the bewildered citizens and the guards who tried to stop her, Aurelia finally arrived at the top of Silvermoon City's main gate. In her field of vision, a mixed army of tens of thousands of tribes and trolls had long been prepared to attack the city. Over 1,000 huge and crude catapults were lined up in a row. The orc laborers panted heavily, carrying heavy sandbags on their backs, ready to fill up all obstacles on the siege road with sandbags or their corpses. The heavily armed orc warriors roared restlessly, and the even more cruel trolls continued to slaughter the elven captives before the battle began, carrying out the last blood sacrifice before the battle. However, when Aurelia rushed up to stand on the top of the city wall, she suddenly stirred up strong gusts of wind behind her, condensing the hurricane into a huge battle bow. After she shot out Duque's storm flag, half of the battlefield below fell silent. 500 meters away, the azure storm flag that was stuck in the ground fluttered in the wind. Every orc who saw this flag was in an uproar. There was no longer that fierce and unparalleled aura, but instead an indescribable panic. Chapter 390. It's Duke Marcus? It's Duke Marcus. It's really Duke Marcus. Beastmen were very one-track-minded. They worshipped their own culture and heritage. Apart from a very small number of ambitious people, most orcs would rather fight a giant dragon than learn even a single character in another language. There were not many foreign names that ordinary beastmen could remember. 90% of beastmen didn't even know what trolls were called. They were often called skinny when they needed to. However, every beastman remembered a nightmarish name, Duke Marcus. They also remembered his blue flag with the symbol of a tornado, because this flag represented a terrifying legend that no orc hero had been able to break until now. There was only one meaning to this myth, and that was the blood of 500,000 orcs. From the elven forest fire, to the burning of Stormwind City, to the massacre by the battleship flying the blue Stormwind flag when crossing the sea, to the 2 meat grinder battles in South Shore, to the hinterlands being toyed with time and time again. Duque was the absolute nightmare of the beastmen. Beastmen often complained that warlocks used demonic powers. However, in the eyes of most beastmen, Duque was the true king of demons. Rumor had it that Duque had endless magic power and countless devil's hands. When he released the flames of hell, he could destroy the heavens and earth. He could blow up a planet with 1 move, and pierce through the entire universe with 2 moves. Most beastmen were illiterate anyway. The more they spread, the more unbelievable it became. If Orgrim was leading the hotheads who had just come from the Dark Portal, perhaps Orgrim would even try to trick them into testing the waters. Obviously, they weren't. They were the last elites of the Blackrock tribe, but they were also survivors who had been tortured and killed by Duque multiple times. They could kill any kingdom in the world without hesitation, or the owner of any flag, except for the owner of this flag. The former chief and great chief, Blackhand, was dead. Close to 60,000 Blackstone elites had become burial goods for Stormwind City. Even the Blacktooth clan, which had split off from the Blackrock clan, had suffered heavy casualties in the recent battle of the Earthy Highlands due to an elemental giant princess who had appeared out of nowhere. Almost all of Duque's victories were built on the pain of the Blackrock clan. In the Blackrock clan, every household had the name of Duque, which was equivalent to the god of death. The morale of the entire orc camp declined at a visible rate. All of them lowered their heads, not even daring to look at the flag. Orgrim, who had never drunk demonic blood, maintained the natural reddish-brown skin of a beastman, but now his face was ashen. He was livid at the disappointment of his fellow clansmen. His face was also ashen because of another matter. Gul'dan. Did that female long ears use the power of the storm altar? Orgrim grabbed Dan in shock and asked hurriedly. Gul'dan glanced at him, then lowered his head and replied, "Correct." This time, Orgrim did not feel anger at the disappointment of his clansmen. Instead, he felt a bone-chilling coldness. It was as if in that instant, the illusory death scythe had brushed past his majestic body like an untraceable cold wind. Everything that had happened since he had landed in the hinterlands replayed in his mind like a movie. Orgrim suddenly felt like he was a clown dancing in the palm of a ghost. He had thought that it was a good move to get a new force to join him and attack the main city of the elves from thousands of miles away. Who knew that everything he had done, every step he had taken, was all within Duque's calculations. If the evidence was not obvious before, everything could be explained from the moment he deciphered the runestone. Duque also coveted the power of the runestone, but due to the good relationship between the elves and humans, he could not take the initiative to do it. So, he used the orcs to destroy the runestone first, and then took advantage of it himself. The elves did not belong to the Lordaeron alliance. No matter how many elves died, it had nothing to do with him, a human, or the alliance. So, he could watch coldly from the perspective of a bystander as hundreds of thousands of elves were slaughtered by the allied forces of the orcs and the trolls, until the elves could not take it anymore and gave in. Of course, the horde had taken all the notoriety. It was obvious that Duque had reaped all the benefits. Even though Orgrim did not know what Duque had gotten, it was clear that Duque had gotten what he wanted. That was why he had raised the flag to warn the horde. Zuluid did not seem to care and muttered, "So what if that Duque is here? I don't believe he can save so many long ears by himself." "Umph." Orgrim snorted coldly, "Duke Marcus has nothing to do with the holy power that his monarch believes in. He can even burn down the main city of his own country. Why can't he burn down the city of the long ears when the horde attacks this one, and let us be buried with the long ears? If he could be so cruel to himself, he would definitely be even more cruel to others." This logic seemed to be accurate. It was a pity that Orgrim would never know that Duque's origins had nothing to do with Stormwind City. Orgrim felt bitter. The great chief hesitated. With regards to Duke's defensive skills, Orgrim definitely had a deep understanding of them. The cries of his compatriots who had died under the three-dimensional attacks seemed to echo in Orgrim's ears. If Orgrim had the Horde's army at hand, he would have a steady stream of orc reinforcements with the Dark Portal's supply line at his back. Perhaps Orgrim really did not believe it, and wanted to fight Duque. No matter what, destroying a race's capital was still something that boosted the morale of the race. That was under the premise that Duque did not interfere. But now, the situation had changed drastically. Originally, Orgrim thought that even if Grom Hellscream's main force could not take down the capital of the strongest human kingdom, Lordaeron, they would still be able to deal a heavy blow to the allied forces. Who would have thought that Grom's assault would be destroyed by a new flaming weapon invented by Duque? He only found out about this after he promised Zhu Jin to attack the elves and stepped into the Long Song forest. Grom could no longer rely on his own forces to break out of the encirclement, and needed his Blackrock clan. He did not have the capital to waste any more time here. Moreover, Duque's personality was one that would bite off a piece of flesh from you even if he suffered heavy losses. This gave Orgrim a headache the most. With all these factors in mind, Orgrim believed that retreating was the only option. He would never have thought that if he really wanted to fight, Silvery Moon would not be able to withstand it. Inform Zhu Jin. Retreat. The great chief ordered. Chapter 391. The ear-piercing sound of metal clanging rang out. Every orc lowered their shoulders as if they'd been pardoned, returning to camp with their equipment. On the city wall, every single elf had their mouths wide open in disbelief as they acted as witnesses to this miraculous scene in astonishment. They retreated just like that? An army of 100,000 had been scared off by a flag? What flag was that? By the light of the sun, could this be the flag of the legendary Titan of creation? On the city wall, the elves who didn't know what had happened were bursting with curiosity. They all looked inquisitively at General Aurelia, who'd shot the entire flag 500 meters away. Aurelia ignored their gazes and muttered to herself. "He did it." "He did." Windsor was the first to answer. It seems like there's nothing our new master can't do? Servanas added in a rebellious tone. Only you and Big Sis agreed to the transfer, the quietest Lilith complained. Aurelia smiled bitterly. Silly sister, we all ran, but you still didn't want to. This is bad for you. Servanas clamped fourth sister's neck under his arm and smirked. If you're really that unwilling, you shouldn't have followed Big Sis and me to ride chocobos across half of Silvery Moon to demonstrate to the counselors. Lilith didn't say anything, tacitly admitting that her second sister had seen through her thoughts. At that moment, the ones who were the most shocked were the counselors who were watching the live broadcast, as well as the Sun King and his son. Retreated? They retreated just like that? Although everyone could tell that the troll was unwilling, he'd still retreated in the end. Retreating with a single flag? That was retreating with a single flag. If not for the fact that the humans and orcs had been at war for more than a year, and millions of lives had been sacrificed in the war and massacre, the hatred between them would have been so intense that it couldn't be resolved. The elves would definitely think that the orcs and humans were putting on a show to trick the high elves. Of course, the unease and panic on the faces of the orc warriors couldn't lie. Now, regardless of whether Duque had used his illustrious reputation or something else to achieve it, Duque had done it. Even if the negotiations between Kuel Salis and the Alliance failed, at least Duque had helped them by the most precious time. Whether the High Elves were willing or not, the entire Kuel Salis was now in a state of war. Every 3 days, 100 groups of qualified blade throwers could be trained from the civilians who had never been in combat. 1,000 craftsmen who were engaged in other jobs could be turned into craftsmen for war machines. The structure craftsmen could produce 50 thrown arcane guards. The High Elves were stunned. When they truly unearthed their combat potential, they would be able to hold on for a while longer. Of course, without Duque, they wouldn't have been able to hold on for too long. The most important reason was that the country had fallen too quickly. Nearly 50% of the citizens outside Silvermoon City had either been slaughtered or blocked by the Horde's army. When the Trolls' headhunting squad wiped out all of these resistors, the disadvantage of the elves' small population would be magnified. The few elves could not resist the Horde's army at all. At this moment, everything was different. The haze of war had not completely dissipated, but at least everyone could see the light of hope, even if that light came from a human named Duque. In the hall, the Sun King Anastrian spoke. Sir Marcus, your reputation is so great that every eyewitness is amazed. I have to admit that although you are young, you do indeed have the ability to lead this terrible war between races. Let us use this as the basis for our negotiations. As the Sun King waved his hand, a magic device beneath Duque's feet was activated. Don't misunderstand, it was not a magic trap, but a raised platform. 1 level, 2 levels, a total of 9 levels, allowing Duque to rise to the same height as the Sun King. A rectangular table appeared between the Sun King and Duque. The Silvermoon Council's acting chairman, Morlens, could only sit next to the Sun King. On the other hand, Duque let Alucia sit next to him, acting as a clerk. With the posture set, the other counselors could only listen from a few levels lower. It seemed that they were not even qualified to speak. This was the punishment the Sun King gave to the counselors after he regained control of the country. After sitting down, Duque's first words were, "Before the negotiations officially begin, I have a small personal request." "Speak." "I have great admiration for your Ranger General, Illyria Windrunner, and her Ranger family. After the war with the Beastmen, I will have a small half of the Elven Forest. Therefore, I need an excellent team of Rangers to help me take care of my forest. I wonder if your Majesty is willing to part with this? A small request? I'm afraid this is your biggest goal, isn't it?" Anastrian's murky eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. "The elves are free. We allow different opinions and lifestyles. Just like how our fellow night elves could not accept our pursuit of magic more than 6,000 years ago and agreed to let us leave. For those elves who wish to live a different life, we will not be overly demanding. Thank you in advance. But I also have a small condition." Duque narrowed his eyes, his deep black pupils bursting with a look that said, "If you are too different, don't blame me for flipping the table. Speak." Before the main force of the horde is chased out of the Long Song forest, every Windrunner must continue to wear the badge of Kuel Salis. Sure. Duque knew that this was the High Elves' pride at work. The Sunstrider royal family did not have a princess, so naturally there was no marriage alliance. Even if they lost face now, it was not a big deal. But if everyone knew that reinforcements were obtained by selling off their own general, how could the Sunstrider lead this country in the future? Contrary to the expectations of the Sun King and the Silver Moon Council, Duque did not put forward any harsh demands, such as territory or the large amount of magic literature and knowledge that the High Elves regarded as treasures. Instead, he put forward many things or requests that the High Elves did not understand. First, the Lordaeron Alliance urgently needed mages. After ensuring the safety of the Long Song Forest, Kuel Salis had to send no less than 20 Morning Star mages and 5 Radiant Moon mages to form a 1,000-man team of mages to participate in the battle against the orcs. The team of mages would listen directly to the current Commander-in-Chief and Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Alliance. They would serve until the passage through which the orcs came to Azeroth, the Dark Portal, was closed. Second was technology. Duque did not ask for magic knowledge, but instead asked for a large pile of information on arcane construct guards, as well as magic crystals that could be counted in tons. Of course, this batch of crystals was a sky-high fortune for the Dalajan, but for Kuel Salis, who owned the Sunwell and could mass-produce magic crystals, it was a drop in the bucket. Finally, there was the legal marriage and residency rights between the High Elves and humans. Chapter 392. The other counselors couldn't understand it. The old and wise Sun King understood most of it. First of all, for both public and private reasons, there seemed to be nothing wrong with mobilizing the mages. To quote Kuel Salis, "You can't possibly let Prince Kael, that's work for you, Duque, right?" Sun King immediately knew that the people Duque had taken away were all members of the Silver Moon Council. There were mages on the Alliance's side, mages on the Horde's side, and also mysterious and evil sorcerers. No one could guarantee that no one would die in battle. When more counselors died, the Sun King would naturally have a way to fill the vacancies. At that time, the Parliament would definitely not be a monolithic block, and there would be great opportunities. Secondly, there were the magic crystals. Duque, of course, said that it was to make up for the consumption of the Alliance's mages in the magic war. But as for how to distribute the magic, the commander was the king of warriors, Lothar, who only knew a little about magic. Wasn't it up to Duque, who was in charge of magic in the Alliance? Finally, there was the right to marry. On the surface, it looked like Duque was doing this for his own selfish reasons. He might have a chance to marry Aurelia. However, the Sun King felt that it was not that simple. The High Elves used to boast that their bloodline was nobler than the other races, and they were not allowed to marry openly. Most of the time, they only allowed those who wanted to marry a foreign race to leave their own race. Now that Duque had broken this restriction, there must be a deeper meaning behind it. However, it was not something that the Sun King could understand. In any case, Duque didn't make things difficult for the elves on the core issue that the elves were most concerned about. This was already Duque being merciful. After all the aid from the Alliance was specified within a limited time, the leaders of both sides officially signed. That night, the Sunstrider royal family eagerly announced their decision to join the Alliance to all their citizens, as well as all the terms transparently and openly. Duque even swore to the elven citizens that the Alliance had not made any unreasonable demands. That was all. Well, his personal request was actually more important. From Duque's point of view, the Windrunner family was worth more than all of Kuel Salis. The tribe did not attack that night, so the Sun King decided to take advantage of this rare free time to hold a small party to celebrate joining the Alliance. Small only referred to the number of participants. The specifications were still off the charts. Almost all the big shots in Silver Moon City had come. Melodious music, psychedelic lighting, and especially elf-style sweet wine. In particular, when the marquises and duchesses deliberately showed off their curvaceous bodies in front of Duque, Duque deeply understood why people said that the upper class of the High Elves was rather decadent. But then again, looking at the rosy cheeks, the delicate lips, the plump snow-white skin, and the towering twin peaks, Duke almost couldn't hold them in. Dear host, these females are very much in line with your aesthetic standards, but for the sake of your safety and integrity, I must inform you that the 4 female high elves with the surname Windrunner are watching you in a special way. Shut up. After bickering with the system elf in his own mental world, Duke saw Kale, that's coming over. Oh, that's rare. Duke, I thought you worked so hard to get father to approve the intermarriage because you wanted to get some benefits for yourself? Kale, and Duke didn't have any irreconcilable conflicts. It should be said that they didn't have any conflicts at all, so they were still considered friends in private. Duke raised his exquisite crystal wine glass. Alright, I admit that the beauties of the high elves are definitely the most unique scenery I've seen in my life. For most high elves, time is eternal, and only white scenery is left in the sky of history. So they seek excitement and novelty to tell themselves that they are still alive. As expected of the handsome prince who was known for being cultured and refined. Even his casual words were so philosophical and poetic. Duque smiled. Does that mean that the universe in which you are in is blurred, and everything is like a dream? That was slightly stunned. He did not expect Duque to be so cultured. After all, he had never talked to Duque in detail, and subconsciously felt that a 16-year-old youth from a commoner's background would not have good self-restraint. That smiled subconsciously. If this is a dream, then it's too bad. I hope this is just a slight low point in the long river of history. This is indeed a low point for the high elves, as an ally of the elves for 3,000 years. And as a good friend of yours, I should do my part to help you and the high elves rise again. Duque rarely boasted like this. Coupled with Duque's shocking achievements, this kind of empty promise seemed extra tempting. That was unusually clear-headed. Although I can't wait to see your heroism, Duque, before that, we have to at least wait for a new batch of soldiers to be trained. It's fine. In 5 days at most, our armies will be able to converge, and then we can hunt together, Duque said mysteriously. There were some things that could not be said openly. Was not sure what Duque had prepared. But one thing was certain, and that was that Duque had found the Sunstrider royal family and not the Silvermoon Council as a partner. Finally getting rid of the wild bees and butterflies, it did not take Duque long to find Aurelia, who was drinking alone on a balcony not far from the banquet hall. Her gorgeous long golden hair fluttered gently in the night wind. Her exquisite and flawless facial features were like a perfect work of art. Under her thin eyelashes, the pair of green eyes that he had just glimpsed were closed, but one could still feel the charm that sucked people in. From a distance, her body was so slender that it seemed like porcelain that would shatter at a touch. She could not be considered the most perfect and beautiful. Purely from a delicate point of view, Aurelia even lost to Princess Kalia Menethil. But when he walked closer, he found that the long period of training made her figure easily outline a very sexy and wild beauty at any time. After killing so many people, there was naturally a faint murderous aura. This aura naturally made Aurelia a special existence that most people could only look at from afar and not play with. But to Duque, she exuded a breathtaking charm. It was such a beautiful woman who seemed to have walked out of the legends of bards, a mixture of wild and noble beauty, who had an indescribable desolation on her face at this moment. A gust of wind blew, and Aurelia turned her head, her green eyes staring at Duque. Do you know? Sometimes I wonder if I can continue to live in a dream called Supreme Glory of the High Elves if I kill you, and I don't have to bear the pain of leaving my compatriots and country. Chapter 393. Kill me and I'll resurrect too. Duque thought quietly in his heart. Duque sighed softly. The world has changed. If I don't open my eyes, I'll only fall into the deepest despair the moment I wake up. It's not too late, Aurelia. You can still regret it. Regret what? Regret that I didn't see the Silvermoon Council's true colors earlier? Or regret that I served you? What a joke. I, Aurelia Windrunner, Never regret what I do. Illyria wasn't wearing her ranger uniform. She was only wearing a pure white evening dress. On the surface, she looked like a gentle and pleasant beauty, but in reality, she was a heroine as fierce as a storm. At some point, Aurelia was already leaning on Duque's shoulder, who was wearing a blue and white evening gown. Because Duque had grown taller, Aurelia was now slightly lower than Duque's head. She snuggled up to Duque, and even when Duque consciously hugged her waist, she didn't feel uncomfortable at all. It was as harmonious as a perfect painting. Duque said lightly, "It's good that you don't regret it, little rascal. Not regretting it doesn't mean you're not sad or in pain." After a pause, Aurelia continued, "Don't move, just let me lean on you for a while." The two snuggled up to each other, enjoying the warmth from each other and the warm feeling of their souls merging. After an unknown period of time. "Hey, Duque, what will happen to Azeroth in the future?" Duque looked up at the starry sky with a deep expression. His gaze seemed to have transcended the void, transcended history, and arrived at a certain node in the future. Duque's voice was ethereal and dreamy. "The Burning Legion has made a move again. Even if I don't want to admit it, beating Sargeras into the bottomless abyss isn't the end. In 5 years at the earliest, or 10 years at the latest, the Burning Legion will definitely make a bigger move. At that time, we might need all the races to work together to get through this." Aurelia's whole body trembled, and the 3 beautiful figures who had been eavesdropping on the tree not far away also trembled. The Windrunner sisters recalled all of Duque's miracles. That kind of prophecy of the highest level, like a charlatan, gave each of them a strange premonition. It was as if their fates would be tightly linked to Duque's future. He gently stroked Aurelia's soft golden hair. "But before that, I promise you that I will make the culprit behind the massacre of the High Elves, Zujin, pay the most tragic price." At that moment, Duque felt Aurelia's fingers tighten around him. Those fingers that looked like tender white jade suddenly turned into the sharpest dragon's claws. The great force that came from those fingers made Duque's shoulder feel a little pain. "I'm sorry." Aurelia suddenly came to her senses and apologized. "It's okay." Duque silently added the fitness option to his growth plan. "Should I get a battle mage subclass?" Almost at the same time, Zujin, who was in the tribe's main camp, felt his mind go blank. The tribe has done enough for the trolls. Now it's time for the trolls to fulfill their promise and serve the tribe. I need the trolls to obey orders and follow us to attack the humans' capital. Zujin thought that he was hearing things. However, the serious expressions of Orgrim and the other tribe chiefs told him that they were not joking. The hatred accumulated over the generations, the voices and smiles of the trolls who had died tragically, all of this seemed to naturally appear in his mind. He almost didn't think, and subconsciously smashed the table in front of him, shouting, "Don't worry, I'll kill you." Betrayal. This is the tribe's betrayal to the trolls. A ray of black light shot out from the Troll King's palm, almost splitting Orgrim's hideous face in half. It was a battle axe. A battle axe that had been strengthened by the power of storms. Kargath Bladefist, the chieftain of the Shattered Palm clan, swung the blade attached to his arm like lightning, instantly knocking away the battle axe that Zujin had thrown. The battle axe that flew away hit the largest support of the huge tent. With a loud bang, a gust of wind shot out from the axe. Under the impact of the wind, the huge tent that was made of animal skin was torn into pieces by the huge force, flying everywhere in an instant. The turbulence caused by the wind instantly sent a few of the personal guards stationed near the chieftain's tent flying. One of them even crashed into a huge stone pillar beside the tent, almost causing him to cry out in pain. However, the loyal personal guard did not have the time to complain. He ignored the pain in his back that felt like all the bones in his body had been broken, and crawled up from the ground. As he rushed towards the tent, he shouted, "Enemy attack!" The chieftain's tent was attacked. In less than a second, the entire tribe's camp was in an uproar. "It's okay. Calm down. All of you, calm down." Orgrim's thunderous roar temporarily calmed the crowd down. When the gigantic tent collapsed, revealing the panting Zujin and the cold-looking Kargath, who had raised the sharp blade in his arm, all of them realized that the trolls and the horde seemed to have fallen apart. Zhu Jin was not alone. Besides Zhu Jin, there were also a few chieftains from different clans. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Zhu Jin was a small chieftain of the tribe. When Zhu Jin got into a fighting stance, they naturally took out their weapons. Originally, the beastmen and trolls had already set up camp together, and there were no fences separating them. Now that there was such a sudden turn of events, everyone was dumbfounded. They picked up their weapons, not knowing whether they should attack or not. Orgrim, you liar! We agreed to conquer the entire world together. The beastmen wanted the plains and mountains, and the trolls wanted all the forests. Zhu Jin excitedly waved his long and powerful arms, roaring loudly. The tribe did not lie to you. This is our final goal. However, in the contract, we wrote that the tribe will help you defeat the main forces of the High Elves, and the trolls will take their final revenge. It was clearly written in the contract. Orgrim took out the contract and raised it up high. The tribe has killed a total of 70,000 High Elves in the 2 battles. In reality, you trolls have also killed more than 100,000 High Elven civilians. The tribe has fulfilled its promise. But this is not enough. Those long-eared Silvery Moon City are still here. But why did the beastmen retreat when they saw the blue war flag today? No, the main point is not the war flag. The main point is that we have received the latest news. The tribe's other army of 200,000 beastmen has been obstructed and surrounded in the Silvery Pine Forest. We need to quickly conquer the capital of a human kingdom, reduce the pressure on them, and rescue them. Orgrim tried to cover up everything by saying that it was a strategic need. From a strategic point of view, Orgrim's choice was undoubtedly correct. Chapter 394. After all the chiefs agreed that Deity was using the horde to weaken the High Elves. If the horde dared to attack Silvery Moon, Deity would dare to burn the city again. Even if it was a perfect misunderstanding, and even if Deity wanted to burn the city, the elves would not allow it. But the horde did not know. An alliance that had not been broken for 2,800 years. It sounded grand, didn't it? The horde was a different race and lacked information. Who knew about the petty conflicts between the humans and the elves? In the end, all the chiefs thought that rather than wasting their elites on the elves, who could not harm the humans, it was better to send troops to attack the humans' vital cities. It was a pity that a very intelligent beastman leader met a great demon leader who only knew how to act based on emotions and had long since been blinded by hatred. The result was destined to be a tragedy. No. The trolls will not recognize this alliance written in the common human language. It's full of word games. As long as the horde fights with the trolls, we will still be brothers. We will still be brothers. Zhu Jin raised his remaining battle axe and roared. Orgrim felt aggrieved. There was no direct translation between the troll and beastman languages. The only way to communicate was in the common human language. Zhu Jin, how could you just destroy an alliance written in the common human language? Orgrim was furious. To be honest, the beastmen were not a race with a good temper. I, Orgrim, am the chief of the horde. I have to consider the interests of the entire horde, not the trolls. Do you think that if there is a single high elf who is still alive, I will have 50,000 elites accompany you trolls to kill the last elf? Yes, that's right. This is the only way you can show your sincerity. This is the only way you are qualified to be the trolls' allies. Zulid suddenly stepped forward and swept away all the obstacles between him and Zhu Jin. I repeat on behalf of the chief, the horde does not only have trolls. We have beastmen, ogres, goblins, death knights. The trolls do not have the right to ask the entire horde to be their fighters. Without the support of the horde, you trolls are only fit to be rats in the depths of the forest. You can't even step into the Long Song forest. Zhu Jin's face turned red at Zulahid's blunt humiliation. Rats? How dare you call the people of the great Amani Empire rats? No existence could insult the giant demons. No, Zuluhid. Kneel down and apologize to the ancestors of the giant demons. Apologize? Never. The trolls can't do anything without the orcs. Why should the brave orcs apologize? This time, Zulud was furious, and he whistled. A huge adult dragon suddenly soared into the sky from the back of the camp. Even if it was unwilling, it would let Zujin know what a dragon's breath was as long as Zuluhid gave the order. Zuluhid, this is your last chance. If you don't kneel down and apologize, I'll use the wind to cut off your legs and make you kneel forever. Zujin waved his axe. Bastard. Think about it, if we hadn't built the storm altar for you. Where did you get the power of the storm? Zulud pulled out his warhammer and blasted. Enough. It's enough. Do you really want to fight here and let the humans and elves on the walls laugh at us? Orgrim rushed in between the two and smashed his hammer into the ground. Sand flew everywhere, and a huge circular pit with a diameter of more than 3 meters appeared. Everyone could feel the frightening power of the great chief. For a moment, the whole place was silent. However, the tense atmosphere did not ease at all. Orgrim saw that the ogres and orcs, who had always been close to each other, were now standing in 2 distinct lines. They held their weapons in their hands and looked at each other nervously. Orgrim suddenly realized that the honeymoon period between the Horde and the giant demons had ended the moment Duque's war flag appeared. Orgrim recited the nightmarish name with the greatest hatred in his heart. Duke Marcus, is this your plan? Is this what you wanted to see? Very well. I, Orgrim, will remember your treachery. Orgrim gritted his sharp teeth, and suddenly looked up at Zujin, his eyes like lightning. Wake up, Zujin. The war between the giant demons and the elves has lasted for 6,000 years. In these 6,000 years, neither of you have completely destroyed the other. It is not easy to destroy the other in a short period of time. In order to destroy an intelligent race, it would take a long time and many victories, little by little. The giant demons have won enough this time. As long as the giant demons remain in the Horde, we will destroy all the elves, humans, and dwarves, and dominate this planet. Orgrim's earnest guidance could not be said to be without good intentions. If it were another clear-headed leader with a higher level of intelligence, perhaps he would have listened. Unfortunately, revenge and the consecutive victories had caused Zujin's originally low intelligence to fall to the same level as a retard. He decisively refused. There's no need. The giant demons are ashamed to be associated with a tribe that was scared away by a flag. Zujin raised the remaining axe in his hand and shouted, Giant demons! We don't need to rely on the cowardly orc tribe. We can destroy Silvery Moon City ourselves. The hearts of the giant demons were stirred up by Zujin's provocative declaration. They immediately raised their weapons and let out a heaven-shaking roar. Their spears were like a forest, and it really did look like that. Zujin didn't care about Orgrim and the others' reactions. He just led the troll chieftains away. Idiot! Don't you think that without us, they wouldn't even have the right to step into the Eternal Song Forest? Zuluhid scolded. What should we do? Kargith Bladefist asked. Go! And as soon as possible. Orgrim picked up the map that had fallen to the ground and drew a circle on it. Finally, it landed on a name. We'll go like this and then go here. The tribe chiefs thought for a while and finally nodded. Back at Silvery Moon City, at the banquet hall, Duque reluctantly let go of Aurelia. Duque, rest early. Perhaps tomorrow will be a bitter battle. After all, there are at least 4 days before your reinforcements arrive. Bitter battle? What bitter battle? Duque pretended to be ignorant. What do you mean? The High Elves can't defeat the orcs, ogres, goblins, and giant demons, but can't they defeat a group of giant demons who don't even know how to break through magic? Duque replied with a faint smile. Oh, if this is true, then this is definitely the best news I've heard since Kuel Salis was invaded. The one who replied was not Aurelia, but Prince Kale, who had unknowingly appeared in the corridor a few meters away. Chapter 395. Raising his hand, the prince bowed apologetically. I didn't mean to eavesdrop on your conversation. I just happened to hear it when I came over. Aurelia shrugged, indicating that she had already sensed it. "It's okay. I don't mind." The prince immediately asked anxiously, "Is this the hunt you were talking about?" "If I'm not wrong, my appearance was enough to make the chief of the tribe, Orgrim, give up on attacking Silvermoon City and ask the trolls to leave with the tribe." But Orgrim obviously underestimated the trolls' hatred, madness, and stubbornness towards the elves. So the division of the tribe is almost inevitable. At the earliest, the main force of the tribe will leave tonight, leaving only the trolls to continue attacking Silvermoon City. Duque's words made the eyes of the prince, Aurelia, and the 3 windrunners in charge of eavesdropping immediately brighten. "Really? 1 man and 4 women, 5 voices almost at the same time. F***CK, Illyria was his rumored girlfriend. Forget about his rumored future sisters-in-law eavesdropping, they even gave themselves away together. What the hell was this?" Duque was very embarrassed. Duque could only pretend that he was not talking about love and communicating with Aurelia. With a businesslike expression, he raised the wine glass that he had placed on the balcony railing. "The hunt. Consider it a small gift from me and Kale. That's as a witness of friendship." "Awesome. Too awesome." Phil, that's eyebrows almost stretched to the side of the door frame in joy. Of course, this was an exaggerated figure of speech. Don't believe it. But the prince's joy was not simple. Kale, that had lived for more than 1,000 years, and he had also been an idiot for more than 1,000 years. He had always been a perfectionist, and he had always lived in the gap between responsibility and glory. He was afraid that if he did not do well, he would not be able to be a role model for the elves. So Kale, that had always been more demanding of himself than a Virgo's perfectionist creed. Ever since his army was defeated, he had been under too much pressure. Even if he did not want to listen or ask, he could still hear the criticism of his subjects from time to time and feel the resentful gazes of the families of the fallen. Those were the lives of 20,000 high elves. Just like that, the hopes of the clansmen were destroyed by him. Perhaps he could use various objective circumstances to explain this defeat. But to him, Kale, this was the worst first battle he had ever had. A defeat was a defeat. No matter what explanation he used, this was a stain that he, Kale, could not erase. A stain that would accompany him for life. For the past few days, he had been trying his best to cheer himself up, comforting and encouraging himself. However, his mental exhaustion was getting worse. He really didn't know when the mountain-like mental pressure would crush him. Just when he felt that he couldn't take it anymore and was about to collapse, Duque actually said that he would give him a great credit. Even if he knew that Duque would get the most credit. But his heart couldn't help but jump for joy. That's right. Even if it was a victory without doing anything, it was 10,000 times better than not winning. On the other side, Aurelia also tactfully resolved the prince's embarrassment. His Highness Kale, is an excellent prince. Unfortunately, the situation forced him to put an excessive burden on his shoulders too early. If it was done step by step, His Highness would definitely do better. That previous battle was a pity. To let a dumb guy with no military experience. Dumb guy? Kale, was puzzled by this title. Duque, this bastard, was seriously making up a big truth that even he didn't believe. In my hometown, it's customary to add the word the to the first word of a man's name to form a nickname for him. That's why I'm used to calling Kale, dumb guy. Sorry, if you don't like it, I can. No. I like the title, dumb guy, very much. Kale, voluntarily entered the dumb guy mode. Please go back to the previous topic. Well, even the gods couldn't save him. Why do humans have knight candidates and reserve soldiers? It's the same logic. To suddenly let a dumb guy who has never commanded an army command 20,000 people, to be honest, it's not your fault. It's the council that forced you to take the position of commander. That's frowned slightly. But Duque, you don't seem to have any battlefield experience before? No. I do. When I first became an earth mage, I commanded a dozen mercenaries to deal with the gnolls. Then it was the fishmen and the nagas. Then I led the most experienced Sir Lothar and more than 200 elites to raid Karazhan. Then I organized the defense of a district in Stormwind City. Duque continued to speak the big truth with a serious face. Duque had indeed climbed up step by step, but his miraculous performance in suppressing the tribes was all because he was familiar with history as a transmigrator. Anyway, it was enough to fool the inexperienced Kale. Aurelia didn't think there was anything wrong with it. So, dumb guy, what you need the most now is a mentor who can give you actual combat experience and guide you to deal with the tense situation in front of you and achieve victory. That's right. That person is your brother, me, Duque. It sounded very mysterious and full of a sense of deception. Unfortunately, Duque's battle record was too frightening, and the momentum of repelling an army with one flag was too awesome. Kale, that's had to believe it. If there was anything that overwhelmed his last bit of hesitation, it was undoubtedly the good news from the messenger. Your Highness. Good news. There was an internal strife in the tribe just now. The main force of the tribe, mainly orcs, is withdrawing from the camp. Only the trolls are left. That's and the others were all shocked. Kill, that's looked at Duque again, his eyes filled with almost fanatical worship. Duque revealed a mysterious smile. What did I just say? Kale, that's completely ignored it. He directly bowed his head and said in the most humble tone, Duque, Mentor Marcus, please teach me how to win a battle. Duque hurriedly helped Kale, that's up. There's no need for honorifics. I'm your friend, so it's not a problem for me to give you some pointers. As long as you listen to me, I guarantee that you'll get rid of your decadence. Really? The first thing you have to do is wait for the main force of the tribe to leave. Then, before my reinforcements arrive, just rely on the elven troops to deal a heavy blow to the troll main force. What? Kale, that's immediately lost his voice. Please, have some confidence in yourself, okay? You're now facing a troll army that, except for a few leaders, doesn't know magic at all and can't fight against magic. Didn't you high elves use magic to oppress the trolls for thousands of years? What you did in the past, just do it now. I'll teach you how to deal with the powerhouses on the other side. Duque patiently guided. Oh no, patiently instructed the dumb guy. Chapter 396. How did Kale, that's become an out-and-out rich man in history? From a handsome prince who was loved by everyone, had flat tires, and admired by tens of thousands of people, he had become a villain boss that everyone wanted to kill. Even his own people didn't like him, and everyone wanted him dead. This was a very long and complicated story. Of course, this could be attributed to many objective factors. For example, when Kale, that's took over the High Elves' blame, it was during the destruction of Kuel Salis, the destruction of Silver Moon City, and the death of his father and the Silver Moon Council. As the only high-ranking member who survived, Kale, that's had no choice but to come out and carry the flag. The times could create heroes. Kale, that's really had an indomitable will, he might really be hero material. Unfortunately, not every hero was called Lothar, and not every hero had the will, strength, and luck to restore the country. The biggest reason why Kale, that's could not rise again from the righteous path was his lack of willpower. In the first half of his life, he had not suffered any setbacks at all. He also wanted to work hard and deal with the challenges. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions of the council on the royal power, the council spared no effort to obstruct Kale, that's growth. Even though Kale, that's had practiced powerful magic, he was still a prince who was like a flower in a greenhouse. On the surface, he looked perfect, but in fact, he was very easy to fool. This was why he had led his people away from the righteous path, because of a small conspiracy and a small trick by Queen Naga Vashj. Duque had guessed correctly. At this moment, Kale, that was definitely under a lot of pressure. Those who are capable must lead their people to stand up and fight. This is an unshirkable responsibility of the Sunstrider royal family. You are the only heir of the Sunstrider. You must bear this responsibility. Anastrian's strict teachings had made Kale, That's feel like he was walking on a single log bridge connecting two cliffs for a long time. This failure and the death of 20,000 troops had directly broken the single log bridge in Kale, that's heart. However, at the moment when Kale, that's was about to fall into the abyss of his soul, if someone inadvertently or intentionally extended a helping hand, they would receive a compromise from the bottom of their heart. Just like that, Kale, that's dominance and influence over the High Elves was unknowingly stolen by Duque. In reality, Kale, that's had completed a spiritual escape with a joyful and relieved state of mind. Perhaps he didn't realize it now, but once he encountered a similar desperate situation in the future, Kale, that's would unknowingly trust Duque and become dependent on Duque. The system genie jumped out. Host, I have to say, you are really despicable, and shameless. Shut up. In history, because a certain Grand Marshal of the Alliance was an idiot, most of the High Elves went to the tribe and became the most attractive people in the tribe. Before Duque's transmigration, more than 40% of the Horde players were Blood Elves who were descended from the High Elves. From this, it could be seen that the Blood Elves were the only scenery in the tribe where most races were vicious and affected the appearance of the city. The High Elves had all kinds of bad habits and arrogant habits, but Duque still didn't want to leave the High Elves to the tribe. Duque was trying hard to bluff Kale, that's trying to keep the High Elves from going astray. Of course, in the eyes of Aurelia and her sisters, Duque could be said to be great. The next day, the main force of the tribe really withdrew. Wash your necks and prepare to die. Despicable long ears. The Amani clan will become your grave diggers. Hurry up and surrender. This way we can at least give you a quick death. The trolls shouted as they continued to torture and kill the elven captives. Kale, that's had the urge to stuff a pyroblast into Zhu Jin's mouth as he looked at the giant demon army, which was small in number but still arrogant and clamoring non-stop. Duque reminded Kale, that's, calm down. If you lead the army and rush down now, you can at most kill a few thousand trolls. The remaining trolls will either quickly return to the embrace of the tribe, or they will run around the entire Long Song forest and continue killing your people. But even if you go down immediately, you still won't be able to save those people with axes on their necks. Their deaths are not your responsibility, but the Silver Moon Council's. Duque didn't even blink as he diverted Kale, that's anger. All right, we'll follow your suggestion, Duque. We'll show the enemy that we're weak. Just half an hour ago, Kale, that's, as the chief commander of the city defense, had personally announced Duque's suggestion, show the enemy that we're weak. Before the orc army of Orgrim rolled out of the Long Song forest, they definitely couldn't hurt the troll army. Thus, the following scene happened. The gates of Silver Moon City opened, and hundreds of giant arcane guards over 5 meters tall and weighing over 5 tons charged out under the control of the mages. Following the arcane guards was Aurelia's rangers. Arcane guards. The trolls had no lack of experience fighting against these giant magical creatures. In fact, the Amani trolls all knew the terror of these giant constructs. But today, something seemed different. A mossy troll raised a giant warhammer and roared, dodging the arcane guard's huge fist, and smashed the arcane guard's bluish-purple arm joint. Apart from the core being powered by magic, the arcane guard's entire body was made of high-strength metal. It was especially difficult to destroy it with physical attacks. But this time, when the heavy hammer hit its arm, it actually let out a shrill sound of metal colliding with metal. The hammer bounced off, and the giant metal arm let out a series of unbearable sounds. Just as the troll was dumbfounded, the arcane guard's entire arm fell off. Long Ear's best arcane toys have all been destroyed by the orcs. Jaren, who was controlled by the orcs, had indeed destroyed many arcane guards. The trolls instinctively thought that the High Elves were at their wits' end. On the other side, Zhu Jin also personally entered the fray. Wielding 2 giant axes, his storm combo was so fast that after a series of clanging sounds, the 7 axes hit the same spot one after another. The last axe finally chopped off the head of an arcane guard that was in good condition, deeply embedding the axe into the central circuit of the arcane guard. A burst of purplish-blue sparks that were unique to the arcane construct burst out, and the arcane guard let out an unintelligible mechanical sound, followed by a series of cracking sounds, and the entire arcane guard fell apart. Chapter 397. In the forest not far from the battlefield in front of Silvery Moon, a few orc scouts were watching the scene unfold before them. The mystics of the horde were mainly warlocks, with shamans as support. All the twin-headed ogre mages were pure elemental attack mages, unlike the humans in the Dalajan kingdom, who had spent more than 2,000 years to develop a complete magic civilization. The horde did not have magical communication. In terms of sending messages, they were still in the era of running and messengers. No one in the horde felt that there was a problem. In fact, Orgrim was already very satisfied with the addition of the Red Dragon to the team of messengers. Now, these scouts quickly got what they wanted. When the scouts caught up to Orgrim, they reported to the chief how the High Elves had easily and effectively sent the unsteady arcane guards to their deaths, and how the High Elven Rangers had accurately dodged the rain of javelins that were almost invisible to the naked eye. In the end, the trolls had won the battle. Orgrim let out a long sigh. Someone will have to pay a terrible price for their stupidity. Before it was us, now it's the trolls. But at least I can confirm that Silvery Moon is indeed under Duque's command. The chieftains who were walking slowly beside Orgrim all nodded their heads, as if saying yes. Duke's expression of approval was that's King Sinister. If the elves had heavily injured the trolls after the horde's main force had retreated, Zujin might have woken up and come back pitifully to the horde. That way, even if Zujin was useless, he could still bring 20 to 30,000 trolls who were good at throwing javelins. Unfortunately, Duque did not give Orgrim the chance. As long as the orcs did not leave, Duque would suppress the high elves and not lay a hand on the trolls. Didn't the trolls want to win? Here, I'll send you some useless toys to dismantle every day to fool those silly trolls into thinking that I can really win. But the horde could not wait. Orgrim did not know how long Dogrum Hellscream could last. Moreover, Duque's reinforcements had already started to enter Longsong Forest. They maintained a safe distance of at least 150 kilometers from the main force of the tribe and took a detour from the west side of the forest towards Silvermoon City. It wasn't that Orgrim didn't think of ambushing the reinforcements, but when he found out that Duque had managed to bring Stormwind's fleet to the west coast of Longsong Forest, he knew that the horde had no chance here. Between the orc army and the human reinforcements, there was still an army of early warning robots that covered the mountains and plains. In the worst-case scenario, if the human reinforcements were really ambushed by the horde, they could still retreat to the sea under the cover of the cannons of the warships. Who said that your tribe doesn't have sea power? Duke Marcus, how great would it be if you were an orc? Orgrim muttered to himself. He then raised his head and said without turning his head, "Let's go. One day, we will conquer the entire world. When that time comes, every human, elf, and dwarf will have to crawl under the feet of the orcs." Even though the Battle of Quell, the loss gave Orgrim the feeling that it started anticlimactic, but the humans' use of tactics and strategies, especially Duke's military tactics, seemed to have opened a door to a wider field for him, and Orgrim felt that he had benefited a lot from it. Orgrim was not the only one who had benefited greatly. That was the same. For 3 consecutive days, Kale, that's listened to the rangers report on the retreat of the orcs while watching the trolls' monkey show. Not only Kale, but even the high elves guarding the city began to feel a sense of superiority. It had to be said that the trolls had put in a lot of effort to attack the city. The horde had indeed left all the siege tools for the trolls, but there were many things that the trolls couldn't handle. For example, Galen's giant siege vehicles that were at least 10 to 8 meters tall. With these iron siege vehicles that looked like giant wheels, Silvermoon City's 15-meter-tall, seemingly tall city walls were as fragile as building blocks. If it were the trolls, they wouldn't even budge. The trolls could only use some more conventional siege weapons. Unfortunately, every time they got close to the city walls, Silvermoon City would open the gates and release the dogs. No, the arcane guards, to counterattack. Regardless of how many there were, the arcane guards worked well. They looked intimidating enough. The 4 Windrunner sisters and the Silver Moon Council members were also on the city walls. If the trolls dared to attack the city, the elves would dare to massacre them. In any case, the elves only defended and did not attack. They held out for 3 whole days. On the morning of the 3rd day, it was time for the final battle. Countless small teams of soldiers came out of Silver Moon City's barracks. They quietly passed through the streets and alleys, forming a torrent. They practically filled all the streets, alleys, squares, and roads near the south gate of Silver Moon City. In the widest square, the most elite Imperial Guards were lined up in a few huge square formations. At the front of the square formation, there were 3 neat rows of arcane guards that were completely different from the previous 3 days. They were bigger and more majestic. In front of the arcane guards, there were a lot of thick armor with long steel spikes for collisions. The arcane guards had completely become war machines, and not the guards that the arcanists used to guard their homes. And the nimble elven rangers covered the roofs of almost all the houses on the side of the square. Originally, none of the high-level elves approved of Kale, that's risky counterattack. Even though the main orc force had left, there were still more than 50,000 trolls outside. Even more trolls heard the news and swarmed over from all over the Lordaeron continent to participate in this revenge against the High Elves. But when Duque secretly brought a Nastrian and Kale, that's to a forest to the west of Silver Moon City, the Sunstrider father and son immediately understood Duque's intentions. The 800 Griffin Knights led by the Wildhammer Dwarf King, Kudrin, was the greatest insurance. If anything really happened, these griffins could definitely come out at the critical moment to teach the trolls a lesson. Wasn't this kind of easy victory the best way to restore the reputation of the Sunstrider Wong family? Leaving a few trusted aides by Kudrin's side to act as liaisons and surveillance, the Sun King brazenly pushed for this great counterattack. The rhythmic sound of the elven horn stunned Zhu Jin, who was preparing to attack the city. The gates of Silver Moon City opened once again. Unlike the previous few times, as if afraid that the trolls would take the opportunity to rush in, only one gate was opened. This time, all 7 gates were opened. Like water slowly overflowing a dam, the High Elves' torrent rushed out of Silver Moon City. Every troll was dumbfounded. Chapter 398. The first to bear the brunt were the modified arcane guards. The trolls began to doubt their eyes when they saw the arcane guards that were completely different from the elves. The elven arcane guard had soft curves all over its body. Apart from its huge fists, when the arcane guard was motionless, it looked like a huge sculpture. The modified arcane guards were filled with a primitive and barbaric style. Their arms, elbows, shoulders, chests, calves, and knees were all covered with hard steel spikes that were at least half a meter long or sharp crescent-shaped blades. He had completely become a killing machine. The arcane constructs at the very front completely ignored all of the trolls' projectiles. The metal javelins and catapults bounced off as soon as they hit the trolls. The hammer-dismantling Gundam, that had worked thousands of times before, could not find a place to attack now. A few brave trolls charged forward, but the charging elves did not even spare them a glance. Every elf stared at the trolls as if they were idiots. That was the truth. The sledgehammers were stuck in the dense spikes of the arcane guards. It was wishful thinking to hit the joints. As a result, the trolls were directly hit by the arcane guards. They were definitely lucky to be sent flying with a few broken ribs and vomiting blood. The ones who suffered the most were those who were nailed to the calves of the arcane guards like pieces of beef waiting to be barbecued. They were neither dead nor alive. The trolls' powerful healing ability made them unable to die for a long time. Their bodies were hooked by the slightly curved spikes and could not be pulled out at all. With every step the arcane guard took, the wounds on his body tore open, and he let out a tragic wail. If the giant beast Goblin or the agile twin-headed ogre warriors were still here, they could at least rely on the brute force of these non-human monsters to forcefully resist the arcane guards with their strength and heavy weapons. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. The trolls were generally more than 2 meters tall. In front of these huge magical and mechanical creatures, They were as laughable as ants. No, Zhu Jin's subordinate, Nararak, roared. As one of the best who had undergone the transformation of the Storm Altar, Nararak had obtained a transformation ability similar to that of a druid. With a roar that sounded like it came from ancient times, he turned into a giant bear that was more than 6 meters tall and weighed at least 5 tons. The giant bear was charging. It was an unscientific combat technique based on the warrior's charge skill. The huge and sharp bear claws dug a deep ravine on the ground that was deep enough to fit a person's calf. The huge and exaggerated figure left a stream of light on the ground. Wild assault. Using its extraordinarily thick fur, Nararak's bear paw smashed the spikes and blades on the arcane guard's body before smashing the arcane construct's joints. After the giant arcana guard collapsed, it seemed to be struggling to get up. In the blink of an eye, the giant bear had smashed the arcana technique core with its claws. On the city wall, Kale, that's frowned. Duque's voice rang in the prince's ear. Let Saladre and Segunar go up with 2 healers. Send a team of elite rangers or mages to take care of the rest. Kale, that's did as he was told, and the effect was immediate. Nararak, who had a particularly powerful impact, was immediately restrained. The prince's 2 strong hands were just in time to restrain Nararak. At this time, another troll that could summon hurricanes and lightning appeared. He was Eichelson, who had the resounding nickname of Eagle God. He destroyed 3 arcana guards with a powerful lightning strike, and then summoned hurricanes that easily swept away a large number of elven soldiers. Kale, that's face twitched as he looked at the soldiers who were sent flying into the sky and blasted into charcoal by the terrifying lightning strike. Duque snapped his fingers and summoned Aurelia and Servanas. Duque's instructions were simple and violent. Stand in the eye of the storm and shoot everything that has nothing to do with the elves. On the battlefield, rescue was like putting out a fire. Every moment of delay was the loss of dozens of lives. The Windrunner sisters leaped from the top of the high city wall and glided into the battlefield. After 7 or 8 quick and agile jumps, they faced off against Eichelson. Next, a few of Zhu Jin's subordinates who had been strengthened by the Storm Altar acted for the first time. However, after a short period of viciousness, Duque gave the prince a few pointers, and those guys were restrained. At this time, the way Kale, that's looked at Duque changed. Duque's foresight was not enough to describe Eichelson. His earth-shattering power of observation was not enough to describe him. The kind of penetrating power that could see through the enemy's weakness with a glance. This made Kale, that's admire him greatly. A feeling of worship grew wildly in the heart of the Sunstrider prince. Kaisi, this is actually not a big deal. Actually, after Aurelia told me that Ghoul Dan destroyed the runestone, I rushed to the scene. After some research, I had already deduced 80% of the opponent's skills and strength, and had already thought of a countermeasure. The response I made after seeing it on the battlefield was just a supplement to what I've been thinking these past few days. Dude, I admire you. You don't need to admire me. You can do this too. As long as you are good at observation and thinking, you will be able to discover many things that you have been ignoring before. As long as you make more complete preparations than the enemy, the scales of victory will naturally tilt towards your side during the confrontation on the battlefield. I have learned from you. Kale, that's bowed deeply to Duque. Duque gladly accepted it. The trolls had always been at a disadvantage when fighting against the elves. After the experts strengthened by the Storm Altar were restrained, the trolls were once again at their wits' end. The scattered spears thrown at the elven troops were mostly blocked by the ferocious arcane guards at the front. Less than 10% of the spears were thrown at the back. Even if a few elves fell occasionally, the soldiers at the back would immediately fill in the gaps. The enemies in front of them seemed endless, causing Zhu Jin to feel a sense of helplessness. In terms of numbers, the trolls definitely had the upper hand. However, when hundreds of arcane guards lined up in a row and pressed down with an earth-shattering momentum, it felt like the elves had become a true army. Although the trolls did not put down their weapons and escape, they could not help but retreat uncontrollably. They wanted to retreat from the plains in front of Silvery Moon back into the Long Song Forest. At least the complex terrain there could stop the huge arcane guard's charge. At least there, they did not need to face the astonishing momentum that could make the earth tremble. Chapter 399. The trolls are about to escape. Kale, that's reminded him. Taking the Amani trolls as an example, one of the reasons why the elves hadn't been able to exterminate them for thousands of years was that forest trolls were natural forest killers. This was especially true for someone like Zhu Jin. As long as he didn't want to be caught, he wouldn't be caught. As long as he didn't want to be caught, then even if the best rangers in Kuel Salis were sent to hunt him down, they wouldn't be able to catch him. Before Duque's crazy and unreasonable Yao Yao army appeared, the war in the forest was a battle between trolls and elven rangers. For thousands of years, neither could completely overwhelm the other. Often, when there were too many trolls, they would rush out of the depths of the forest and seek death. When the trolls were killed, they would immediately scram back into the forest to recuperate. This kind of tug-of-war had been going on for thousands of years. Prince Kale, had also heard of the power of the Yao Yao. In terms of early warning, the Yao Yao was indeed powerful. Unfortunately, this annoying little fellow was too slow. In a full-speed pursuit, the Yao Yao was useless. Again, it was easy to break up and defeat trolls, but difficult to annihilate trolls. Compared to the sacrifice of nearly 200,000 soldiers and civilians, defeating a troll army that had lost the support of the orcs was far from enough to satisfy the elves' hatred. That was anxious. Duque shook his head leisurely. The way of a commander, in addition to looking at the overall situation and making the most beneficial choices for one's side, is to learn to read people and learn to wholeheartedly believe in experts who are proficient in certain areas. Experts? Everyone has their own strengths. Duque pointed at the fighting Sagunner. Brave and ruthless, the vanguard. Duque then pointed at Aurelia, who didn't forget to command and coordinate the four sides in the fierce battle. Able to fight and control, the general. Duque finally pointed at himself. Able to complete special tasks at special times and places, the specialist. With that, Duque chanted a string of incantations. When Kale, first heard it, he instinctively felt that it was very familiar, because it was the incantation to activate the runestone array buried under Longsong Forest. However, when he listened carefully, he felt that something was amiss. From the middle part onwards, the incantation had been changed beyond recognition. Even if it was the same magical device, different incantations often corresponded to different effects. Kale, really didn't know how Duque knew about this incantation and how he modified it. The prince barely understood Duke's incantation in the language of the High Elves. He changed the word rise to sink and deposit to release. However, more than 30% of the runestones had been destroyed, and most of the arcane energy buried under the forest had been used up. What else could Duque do? In Kale, expectations, it would be difficult to even make a fire with a runestone magic circle, let alone a flame that could incinerate 10,000 people. At this moment, in Duque's perception, the situation was completely different. Lines of data flowed down from Duque's retina like a waterfall, pouring into Duque's vision and imprinting in Duque's mental world at the same time. A large amount of knowledge poured into Duque's head like a force-feeding duck. This should have been a very uncomfortable process, but when all the knowledge was crushed into fragments of memories and continuously rotated at high speed, like rivers flowing into the sea, everything changed. Importing geological data of Longsong Forest, comparing the geological conditions of the battlefield, feeding back the magic conditions into a data link, loading the strongest king terrain modification system. Authority, supreme. Who was beside Duque, watched in astonishment as Duque's pupils gradually changed from deep black to the color of flowing mercury. A series of magic waves gradually appeared under his feet, as if the magic circuit on his body extended from his limbs to the city wall, and then from the city wall to the entire battlefield. How is this possible? Kale, cried out in shock. As the ancestors of magic, The biggest difference between the High Elves and the city wall was that they solidified the city wall of Silvermoon City with magic to prevent the wall from collapsing under the effects of high temperatures and low temperatures. Even the Sun King himself, who had built the city wall back then, could not allow his magic to pass through the city wall. This was because the city wall had been reinforced and solidified many times with magic. However, Duque did it. Boom. The large area where the trolls stood seemed to have experienced an incomparably violent earthquake. Suddenly, the entire area shook. Standing on the high city wall, Kale, and a few counselors of the Silvermoon Council could see the entire battlefield even more clearly. It was as if an indomitable giant beast had chomped down on the area behind the troll. A huge crescent-shaped area suddenly sank by a full 5 meters. It's not just 5 meters. It was as if the shapeless behemoth was biting down again, making the 3-kilometer-long semicircular pit even deeper. Boom. There was another loud noise. Every time a loud noise came from the ground, the crack would expand, deepen, and widen. No troll knew how deep the dark trench was, but it was already more than 30 meters wide. The trolls were horrified to find that their escape route had been cut off. Before entering the forest again, they first had to face the huge trench that could not be crossed by themselves. At this moment, Duque smiled. Kale, please. Use your flames to make the trolls jump into the trench and go to hell. Kale, eyes widened. He suddenly realized that this was the hunt that Duque was talking about. Without hesitation, Kale, activated all the magic circuits in his body. His entire body rose into the air and burst forth with a strong light that was enough to dazzle the eyes of every warrior on the battlefield. The power of the flames that flowed out of Kale, body was too terrifying. In just a few breaths, he turned into a huge and illusory fire phoenix. This huge creature that was burning with flames slowly floated down from the city wall. It pounced on its flame wings that were wider than the main gate of Silvermoon City. Every time it flapped its wings, it swept up blazing turbulence. Kale, did not even have to attack. Just the power of the flames that flowed out was already like a flaming storm that could destroy half of the forest. The High Elves watched as their prince flew over their heads with a ferocious might that could overturn the entire battlefield. They immediately burst into loud cheers that could overturn the clouds in the sky. Long live the Sunstrider! Long live His Highness Kale! Kale, activated all the magic circuits in his body, and the various magic treasures of the Sunstrider royal family on his body immediately shone brightly. He pushed his palms forward, and a wall of fire that was more than 2 kilometers wide appeared on the battlefield. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.